What they did do is they put a friction factor onto our roadways to account for those other people coming in. And we heard from the community that friction factor is not enough. I understand that. I do want to let you know, between the meetings that I've had here, and I had a meeting with some folks in Rancho Santa Fe, that there is sounds like a groundswell, and it's coming from the community, but we're very happy to take part of it as Encinitas Fire Department. And I spoke to the chief in Rancho Santa Fe Fire Department, is doing a more inclusive regional study next time that includes all of this. And I know that there's been talk to the county supervisor about that for this community. So we'll see how far that goes. I know, we've invested a lot of resources and a lot of money into our plan. It's a great plan, but there will be more iterations coming to it. And there's a possibility, if we get the supervisor support, that there might be more of a regional study the next time around. So I just wanted to bring that up to you. Those were the things that we heard. We heard other things, but those were the two main things we heard over the last two listening sessions that we had. So we do want to hear from you folks. We also have people online. We have 2 hours dedicated to this. What seemed like it worked well before, because we do got quite a few slides to get through, is what worked well before is that if you have a clarifying question or just a quick question in terms of something on the slide, feel free to raise your hand and we'll get to it. But for any extensive questions, or basically if it's not clarifying, if you have a question, if we can get through the program, so we make sure we get through everything, and then the time is ours to have a two-way dialogue, yours and yours especially, and ours. And we'll have that discussion, and we could maybe, once we get through the presentation, be able to dig deeper into the questions that you may have. Does that work for everybody? Okay, so that's what we'll do. And then lastly, like I said before, in the very beginning, this is a team approach. I've been in the fire service, this is my 29th year, and I've been on both sides. I responded to many mega wildfires all up and down the state, and I've had to evacuate because I live in East County, and I've had to evacuate myself and my family more than one time. So I understand a community like this. It doesn't matter where you're at in California, we're always under threat of wildfire. It doesn't matter where you live. California is always under threat of wildfire. And the biggest thing is for us, number one, to recognize that and then learn to deal with it when it does happen. And that's where it takes, my folks, we train every day. They're hard chargers, hard workers. We're going to be here and try and put the fire out as quickly as I can. If we stop the fire when it's small, problem solved, right? We just don't want it to get big. That's our goal. Stop it while it's small. But when the wind hits and it's a wind-driven fire, it's harder to do. And we're going to ask for your help in terms of preparing first, getting your homes ready and your family ready. Have a go bag before the fire. Know what you're going to take. Make sure your family knows, where you're going to meet, how you're going to evacuate. Stay in communication with them, and then prepare your home. Prepare your home. Defensible space, right? Get the ladder fuels out. Ladder fuels meaning, small weeds that go up to big weeds that catches the tree, then catches the eaves on fire. You don't want that. So prepare your home for wildfire, and a lot of that is defensible space. I've been hitting that hard as your fire chief since I've been the fire chief since 2015, and I'll continue to do so. So we do have a very aggressive vegetation management program that is used all throughout the city, but specifically here. So with that, let me move forward in the presentation, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce to you Sarah Lifton in a second. I'm going to tell you about the Fire Safe Council. Fire Safe Council is a nonprofit organization, and there's multiple Fire Safe Councils in this county and throughout the state. What do? Well, if you organize and you become a 501c3 and you get your community wildfire protection plan going, which they're doing right now, it makes you eligible for money, grant money specifically. Grant money for fuel reduction, wood chippers, all that type of stuff. They got a grant from SDG&E. Hopefully you guys got the mailers that were sent out, and that probably went out, I think, in a couple weeks ago. I'm sorry. Who funded that one?
It was a mini grant from the Fire
Okay, I'm sorry. It was the Maine Fire Safe Council. Anyways, so that's part of it. Education, fuel reduction, and to help this community to be resilient when a wildfire hits. So the Fire Safe Council of San Diego County is a nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing fire safety awareness and preparedness, managing fire hazards, and supporting the forest health in San Diego County. And the Olivenhain Fire Safe Council was established in April of 2020. The first president is sitting right here, Denny Novell, helped establish it. The mission of the Olivenhain Fire Safe Council is to mobilize the Olivenhain community to enhance fire prevention, safety, and preparedness for all residents through ongoing outreach, education, and collaborative interventions, projects, and activities. Much like a neighborhood watch for fire, the Fire Safe Council seeks to become a focal point for reliable information and accessible resources to raise awareness among neighbors about the need to harden their homes against possible wildfires and what steps they can take to achieve that, develop preparedness plans, and head off risky behaviors before they result in tragedy. It's a volunteer organization. It's right here in your community. What I like to say is many hands make light work, which means that they will, and Sarah will tell you, which means that they're always looking for volunteers and people to help. It's to protect you guys and all of us in the community. It's a great organization. So with that, I'm going to introduce Sarah Lifton, the chairperson of the Olivenhain Fire Safe Council.
I think we're changing that to president, actually, to be consistent with IRS terminology. When I was in the 3rd grade, my elementary school was evacuated. I grew up in Pasadena. And we saw it start from the playground. First there was a column of smoke, and then there was a column of flame, which I had never seen before at that point. And later in the day, we were evacuated. There was no term like a go bag then that I'm aware of, but that's what my mother started doing when we got home. And she was taking the photos, and she was getting things packed for us to take in case we were evacuated. And my family and I watched the flames on the mountain behind our neighborhood all night, but sometime during the night, the gods were smiling on us, and it reversed course and went over the mountain, and we didn't have to evacuate. But that experience has stayed with me all my life. And by the way, 2 weeks later, the infamous Bel Air fire happened, and it burned, I have to look at numbers, 6,090 acres and destroyed 484 homes, which by today's standard is almost kind of paltry. So there were fires when I was at UCLA. In 2007, I was living in Del Mar Heights, and we were evacuated. And in 2014, the day after I moved to Olivenhain, there were 10 fires in San Diego County, and all but one were arson. So fire's been part of my life almost as long as I can remember, usually but not always in the background. But that said, I've never lived anywhere that was such high fire risk as Olivenhain, or with such limited road infrastructure for evacuation. So when I learned about the Fire Safe Councils in 2019 at a meeting convened by the OTC, it was a no-brainer. Chief Stein and I coordinated the first organizing meeting in April 2020, which took place on Zoom because the lockdown had just started. And thanks to COVID, we didn't have any in-person events until May 2021 when we had our first community wildfire preparedness fair. Since then, we've had a webinar on the insurance crisis, which is archived on our brand new YouTube channel. We've hosted a workshop on fire operations in the wildland-urban interface, which is put on by the Fire Safe Council of San Diego County. We held our second preparedness fair this past May, and as Chief Stein said, we mailed out the evacuation brochure, which was grant-funded, to every address in Olivenhain in the middle of last month. And now Chief Stein would like us to have a pancake breakfast next year. And I want to know who's cooking, because it's not going to be me. So our charge, as he said, is largely education, outreach, facilitation. The county's got a free chipping program. We can put you in touch with them if you need chipping. For the coming year, we have 2 priorities, and both are going to require community input and engagement and participation. The first and the most important is to create a community wildfire protection plan, or CWPP as it's known. I've been told by Kelly Gaffrey, who is the deputy fire marshal we work with, that this is the most important charge we have as a fire safe council. So we're going to need to meet with community members, organizations, and other stakeholders to identify the issues we face as a community and prioritize them. Our board of 6 members currently can't possibly know what's going on in every corner of Olivenhain, but you guys do, at least for your own communities. So, where is vegetation management a problem? Do we need to implement a chipping program? What about signage so firefighters can find everyone's address? That kind of thing. And if you're interested in helping with this process, please see me. Some of our board members and I have attended multiple workshops put on by the County Fire Safe Council, so we have a pretty good idea of what we need to do, but we can't do it without you. The other program is a neighborhood ambassador program, and we did get SDG&E funding for that to launch a pilot. So the way this works is that we will identify people in different neighborhoods to serve as points of contact with the Fire Safe Council, much like a precinct captain in a political campaign or a neighborhood watch captain. And it's an efficient way to share information and expertise. I took a training in it. One thing some ambassador programs do is they have their ambassadors trained to do informational inspections for fire safety, defensible space, home hardening, ember-resistant vents, that kind of thing. And we'll be looking for volunteers to help get this underway. So if you'd like to be a neighborhood ambassador for your corner of Olivenhain, you can contact me. Or you can contact Mike Shields, who's standing in the doorway, who's also on our board, and the OTC board. Huh? Yeah. Yeah. And finally, we're pursuing our own nonprofit status, which is going to open a number of doors for us, especially with regards to fundraising. But it's also going to complicate things because there are various reporting requirements. So if you have accounting or bookkeeping or legal expertise and you'd be willing to share it with us, we'd love to talk with you. And we need volunteers generally to help man booths at events, for example, to help plan events, join the board, and possibly cook pancakes to make Chief Stein happy.
Thank you, Sarah. And you don't have to cook pancakes. I will cook the pancakes. The firefighters will cook the pancakes. We have that down, so no problem. That's a promise. We'll do it next year. As long as we get this turnout, that'd be awesome. We'd love to do it. Thank you. And thank you very much for volunteering and all your hard work. On behalf of the fire department and the community of Olivenhain and Encinitas, thank you for your hard work and the Fire Safe Council. Thank you. So as you can see, it is an important organization that's out here to the benefit of the community. I do have a sign-in sheet going around, so you can make sure. I just want to make sure I have the contacts here, the numbers of people that were in each class. That would be great. And the Fire Safe Council has a sign-up sheet over there if you want to volunteer for them. Okay, so we're going to start to get in the program now. The bolts and really the meat of the brand new updated Olivenhain evacuation plan. We have 2 of the 3 principal consultants here. So I'm going to introduce you to those folks, and then I'm going to turn it over to them. So first, I'm going to introduce you to Shane Lauderdale here. A little bit about Shane. He started his career in the fire service in 1985. The first 25 years with the city of Reading, where he worked as a firefighter, engineer, captain, battalion chief, and deputy chief. He also served as the operations chief and fire chief for the city of Chico. He has also served on a CAL FIRE incident management team since 2001. Those are the teams that manages all the mega wildfires. As an operations section chief and branch director, he responded to many fires and other disasters in the state, including the Thomas Fire in 2017, the Oroville Dam incident, the Camp Fire, which is the one in Paradise, California, in 2018, and the Butte Complex in 2020. And then next on the team is Jaime Rodriguez. He's the licensed traffic engineer that did the traffic studies for our plan. He is the founding principal of Traffic Patterns, a traffic engineering firm based in the San Francisco Bay Area, specializing in traffic management, traffic signals, intelligent transportation systems, and technology. Jaime is also co-founder of Smart City Signals. Smart City Signals is an internet company developing technology to support traffic signal management, bicycle and pedestrian virtual detection, and traffic surveillance solutions based all over. He currently serves as a consulting city traffic engineer for the cities of Los Altos, Saratoga, Foster City, Redwood City, Millbrae, and Pleasant Hill. He has a master's in transportation planning and management from the Mineta Transportation Institute and a civil engineering bachelor's from San Jose State University. These folks will be talking to you about the plan, the rationale, and the justifications. I also want to, the last two sessions, we had our third principal consultant here, so I want to give you a little bit of his background so you know who he is and what he did for the plan. So his name was Ron Bravo, and unfortunately he couldn't be here today. He sends his apologies. He wished he could. He started his career also in 1985. He rose through the ranks of engineer, captain, battalion chief, division chief, and interim CAL FIRE unit chief. He has over 20 years of incident management team experience and holds qualifications in operations, logistics, plans, liaison information officer, and a type 1 incident commander. And he was the incident commander of CAL FIRE Incident Management Team 5 until he retired in 2018. So those are the folks that we had that updated our plan. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Shane and Jaime.
Good morning. It's a pleasure. We'll get this right today. It's a pleasure to meet all of you and to have the opportunity to speak to you and to have worked on this plan. You know, one of the things I want to open with that Chief Stein alluded to, but is the level of planning that this community's went to. I'll be frank with you. In the years that I have done this kind of work, I've never seen a community be this committed to doing what you're doing right now. And so there's a kudos to all the people that have brought this together to make sure you're looking at it. Now with that said, last meeting we had a member of your community, Bruce, was here, and one of the comments he made after we started to talk was what Eisenhower said, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. And so I want you to think about that as we go into this discussion, because that truly is the premise upon which we do the planning. I'll explain that in much more depth as we move forward. But what I want to show you here is Ron, and again, Ron is sorry he couldn't be here. He was ill and couldn't make the trip, so I will try to step in where he left off, but I won't do as good a job, I know. But what he included this photo for you is this is at a large-scale mega-fire incident, as the chief was describing, where one of the first things we do as operations chief is I get with our law enforcement partners. And so on our teams, we carry a sheriff officer and a CHP officer. And as soon as we go to a community that's going to be impacted by a large fire or has been impacted, we start to say, what kind of plans do you have? Have you already done the zone process, which we'll talk about later? And if you haven't, we immediately start that. And so in this tent, you see how many people are involved? That's all of the stakeholders. That's your utility companies, that's your law enforcement from the different areas, because many of the places we go, you would have local government, police officers, and all kinds of different local government agencies that have to be a part of this. And they're all part of this planning process for us. Now, this is a very difficult process if it hasn't been done ahead of time. But because you're already way ahead of this, this process becomes much easier as we move forward. So that's why we wanted to show this. Now, two things I want to speak to. I don't think I did a good job explaining last time. We were asked to do two things. Number one was to take a look at the plans in the surrounding communities, your community, and look at the community in general from a unbiased, we're not community members, haven't lived here, a subject matter expert level at what is in the plan that's good, what's going to serve you well, and what would need to be changed, in our opinion, to make it better. And so that is the recommendations report that we provided. All right? The second thing we were asked to do is to, in the short term, help the department update the present plan based upon what we have available to us right now. All right? And so we've done that, as the chief spoke to. There's some other options that they're going to include, not us, but they're going to include in their revisions to the plan. And this plan is a living document. We're going to talk about that. All right, so let's first of all talk about the overall analysis of your community. And that was a huge part of this because, again, I'm going to go back to the plans are worthless part, is the best thing we can do is create a fire-resilient community. And that's exactly what your fire council is working on. If we can create a fire-resilient community, then the chances are we wouldn't have to evacuate, right? So that would be our dream. It's going to be difficult, but that would be our dream. So if you can see how our community, your community, has changed since 1964 to 2021. In 1964, you had an agrarian community, and fires in this kind of community did not impact a lot of people, did they? And you didn't have the large amount of brush and other homes that were built with So this particular house has shake roof, a wooden siding, and what we call ladder fuels or heavy fuels all around it. One of these houses, and it's on the end of a road that does not have an effective turnaround. So you go to a dead end with a fire engine. That's unsafe for the community. That's unsafe for our firefighters. This is a really, really difficult house to protect. Okay? So if we can change that, so our house is one that can be protected easily, then that makes all the difference in the world. So I live in a forested, high pine trees all around area that is absolutely not protectable, the area, by the fire department. So what did I have to do with my home? Make an area like you have around here that allows for a fire engine to come and stay, because I would like them to stay at my house, right? So that the neighbors now, they don't have that kind of protection around their house. And so firefighters couldn't stay there if a fire was impacting them. But they could come to my house and stay until the fire front passed and then go out and start to do all they could to protect the houses that have been impacted by the fire. So that's what we would want to create, if we can, in our house. And a big part of our report was directed at what can the community do to become more resilient. So the plan's just a little piece. I want everybody to understand that. So again, I'm going to highlight this, but this is a quote out of the document. Evacuation planning is an ongoing process. The evacuation plan should be updated at regular intervals to ensure changes in the community, emerging or mitigated threats, and available resources are reflected in the document. And so, as the chief said, just based upon the feedback he's gotten in these meetings, they're already starting to make revisions to make the plan better for you, and that will not end today. That will be an ongoing process as new technologies are implemented and as the community becomes more resilient. All right. And I just, before I move on, I just want to highlight this sentence. We were asked to look at what could be implemented in the short term. However, since many of the recommendations may be difficult to implement due to budgetary considerations, a lack of available staffing, or conflicting community interest, most of the recommendations found in this document are long-term goals. Okay? So what's an example of a conflicting community interest? Okay. How about the roads? Do you want roads that are walkable and ride bikes on and slow traffic and not a lot of communities outside the community using the roads? And all of those wants are completely in conflict with a very fast evacuation process. I'm not telling you they're wrong. I'm telling you, it's one of what we call a wicked problem, right? It's that problem where you have a challenge in the community that has multiple facets, and you have to weigh those. And so that then becomes the real factor. All right, so as we talk about what we've recommended in the present plan, I'll be able to explain to you why, but I think that there's lots of opportunities for the plan to become better and better year after year. All right, so this is just a fire history map. I know all of you know San Diego County has a fire history, but we want to give you a little bit of background on what that is. So the Harmony Grove fire of 1996 is the only fire that we found in our fire history study that truly impacted Olivenhain in a big way. So many of you probably have evacuated on other fires, but Harmony Grove absolutely impacted the northern sections or eastern sections of the community. And then we have the Cocos fire, and I was actually one of the operations chiefs on the Cocos fire. That was 2014, I believe? Lose track of time here. And then the Witch fire, I brought a strike team down all the way from Shasta County to that fire, so we're very familiar with fighting fire in the area. And then you have several others. What I want to show you here is what is part of what we consider when we look at fire. So as an operations chief, one of the first things I will ask our team to produce for me to evaluate our firefight when I go to a new incident is a fire history map. Now, it doesn't mean the fire is going to burn the same way, but historically, fires burn very similar to other fires that they've burned. So that helps us begin our planning process in where is the fire going to go, how far is it going to go, and where can we probably make our biggest stand and have the most success. And so we based all of those resource deployments on probability of success. Well, as you see here, and we'll go into this more, even the Witch fire, which burned with some rapidity, right? All of these fires, once they get to the coastal belt, they give us opportunity to make an offensive attack that, as you can see, historically speaking, has been effective. All right? So what happens as you hit the coastal belt is you have a change in topography and you have a change in weather, right? I left this morning down out of Encinitas, and it was foggy, and the humidities were really high. And then as you got up here, the sun was shining, it was beautiful, but dry, right? My lips are a little chapped up here. So those are all things we take into consideration as we start to deploy our resources for the most effective firefight. This also comes into effect as we start to look at how we develop evacuation routes. This is the same thing, just a different angle, so you can kind of get a picture of where I-5 is. All right, so as part of our analysis, what we looked at is what has the fire department already done that is something that we say is a good thing, and then look at some things that we think we could do better to make our community more fire resilient. So one of the number one things that I already spoke to is your county, after the Cocos fire and those fires in particular, there was a huge influx of emphasis on planning going on. So Encinitas and the County of San Diego have proactively planned for evacuating this community. So they already had a plan in place, which again, I'm here to tell you, it's sad to say, most communities do not have a plan that's that thorough. Right? Regular and ongoing countywide incident exercises. So I believe on an annual basis, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, you countywide do a drill somewhere with all of your staff to ensure that you are drill ready or incident ready. And all of your agencies, again, sad to say, this isn't the case in a lot of places. Some places, agencies don't work well together. Can you believe that? Here in this county, everyone that we've dealt with is very much on the same page about how to address incidents in your community. And then this is probably one of the biggest things. We were going to make the recommendation, and then there it was. you have what we call an MTC agreement. What that does is that's an agreement with CAL FIRE that the chiefs entered into and the cities entered it into, that as soon as there's an incident that impacts Olivenhain, you have a seamless process to get all the resources that are available to CAL FIRE right here. Airplanes, helicopters, so on and so forth. There's some factors I'm not speaking to in that agreement, but the biggest point is you have that agreement in place, and immediately it makes your ability to quickly respond to an incident much, much more effective. All right? So those are in place. And then your working relationship with the San Diego Sheriff's Office is seamless. And again, that's one of those things we don't find in a lot of communities. And it's so seamless that when there is a fire incident that goes to a certain scale, immediately a sheriff supervisor goes to the incident command post to meet with your battalion chief or whoever's running the incident to begin doing any planning that needs to happen. All right? And also, you've put a quick response vehicle in the community at the fire station in the last couple of years, which makes the opportunity for rapid response to incidents possible. And without going on and on here, just this highlighted point here, the one team approach. I think the chief will talk about that more later, but I just want to talk about how important it is that your entire community and your entire city is on the same page for how to respond to and, more importantly, mitigate the risk to your community from fire. And that is something we already see in place and working in this community. All right, so what were some of our recommendations? Large-scale recommendations were to continue to support the FireWise community concept. So that's happening with your Fire Safe Council, and the whole concept is to make a fire-resilient community so that you do not have the worries that many of you have about how your community will be impacted by fire. Enhance the defensible, adopt enhanced and targeted vegetation management ordinances, enhance the defensible space inspection program, and ensure Encinitas planning standards are aligned with a FireWise community concept. And what we're talking about there is that maybe more thought goes into the kinds of trees and other things that are planted in new development so that those are going to serve you well 20 years from now, not necessarily right now. And require new developments to design a wildfire mitigation plan and funding sources to support ongoing fuels management. Okay. So that is kind of a quick overview of what we did looking at the community, the things that were going well, and some of the big picture recommendations we made. There's many more in the report if you look at it more closely. Now, looking at the report, one of the things that we identified, which is, the evacuation plan, identified in a lot of plans that is missing is a tiered approach to responding to an event. And I'll give you an example. As the chief said, I was one of the operations section chiefs that was assigned to the Oroville Dam failure. And if you remember right, 190,000 people were evacuated. Talk about a little bit of traffic issues. So you had all the way to Sacramento was evacuated during that event. Why? Well, having been the fire chief in Chico, I was quite familiar with the plans that were in place. And the plan for a failure of the dam was based upon the assumption that all of the water in the dam was released at the same time. The worst case scenario. Well, we need to have a worst case scenario, but we also need to have other options to look at for your incident commander. So your battalion chief sitting in the back, what was your name again? Yes, sir. Would be probably one of your first people, if he was working today, to be at an incident that's impacting Olivenhain. So what does he need to make really good decisions about how to protect your community? When to evacuate, when to do those things. He needs what we call decision guidance tools. All all right? And so that's where I come back to this is a plan. This is not necessarily what you will do at the time, because it's going to all be based upon the training, knowledge, and experience of your battalion chief sitting back there that's going to make those decisions on that day that are best for you on that day. The plan just simply is a guidance tool to get everybody on the same page. So what we believed that you needed in your plan was a look at several different scenarios, and we chose 5 different scenarios, both onshore and offshore wind events, like the Santa Ana wind events, and look at how those would impact the community based upon those different criteria I'll go into in a minute. But I just want to point out a few things without getting into too much detail about how these models are done. Number one, who can interpolate a fire behavior model? Not me. I'm a firefighter. I'm a experienced fireman. I am not a fire behavior analyst. I use information brought to me from fire behavior analysts. So that's a very specialized training. It takes years and years to get certified to be able to interpolate the models. Just like you go into a doctor and you get an x-ray, you can bring it to me, I'll read it for you. But you may not want to trust what I'm telling you, because I haven't had the training to be able to interpret what is on that x-ray. Same thing with fire modeling. The other thing about fire modeling is it is a guidance tool. So when I'm in a large-scale incident, I will ask for fire modeling several days out. Usually I do a 72-hour look, right? I'll get with the fire behavior person, the expert. Hopefully it would be the expert that we used on this case, because he's I believe, one of the best in the state. And I'll tell Tim I need that fire behavior analyst work done, and I need wind studies done for these particular areas. And then we also, on our teams, have a National Weather Service meteorologist that comes out, and we work together to get a 3-day look at what the fire expectations are based upon weather. All right? So from those, I will take those studies that they do, those models, and then I make a decision. So here's what is key, and why I keep pointing at your battalion chief back there. This is not, I wish it were, something like in an engineering study where we can do a study and at the end it spits out, this is what you do. There's objective tools we use. These are the objective tools. But at the end of the day, this is all subjective. This is based on your experience, what I've seen before, and what my gut tells me we need to do to deal with this. And it may not be based, at the end of the day, on those models. They'll be based on other experiences that we've had. And we'll do thousands of acres of firing operations. And those tools are all used, but I don't let those tools determine when I do the firing operation. Those tools only help me know when to do that. All right? The other thing that we need to know is that, fire behavior progression models do not reflect fire spread in the urban area. So fire behavior models have not yet been perfected to predict fire behavior once you hit the built environment. They only predict fire behavior, 2 things. In undeveloped areas that have contiguous vegetation, and 2, they only give you a prediction based upon no fire suppression activity. So if it's the middle of the day that the fire happens and the winds are such that aircraft can begin to drop retardant, those models are completely, they're not irrelevant, but they are not reflecting what's going to happen once you have fire fighters on the ground working on the fire. All right, so let's look at what we came up with. First thing was looking at the worst case scenario. So our fire behavior analyst took what historically has been your worst case scenario in this area. And by the way, he didn't just do this from a computer somewhere. He took a field trip with us through a day, looked at the different fuels, And then he also has worked in Riverside County for 40 years, so he knows the area very well. And he looked at the most extreme would be fine dead fuel moistures at 3, very, very low. This would be during a Santa Ana, and a sustained wind speed of 45 miles an hour. And what that showed is that a fire starting just on this side of Escondido, just as you get into the wildland on the west side of Escondido, that fire would impact Olivenhain in approximately 4 hours and 47 minutes. All right, and then without bothering you with all the others, you can see the different options for the other fire behavior probabilities. So what does that mean? Well, number one, what it means is that as soon as there is a fire reported in that area, what does your fire department need to do? Send somebody, get on the phone right away, and are we going to catch this fire or aren't we going to catch it? All right? And that's already in their plan. That's exactly what's going to happen. And so as soon as they have identified the fire, they know it's going to start, they know this fire behavior. So let's say it is this moderately low day, and your battalion chief knows the fire behavior possibilities. Does he need to evacuate all of Olivenhain immediately on this moderately low fire day, even though there's a fire? No. Now, based upon his discussions with the other experts at the ICE Incident Command Post, they will determine maybe a zone, which we'll talk about later, should be put in a warning or should be evacuated. And maybe we want to do a warning with certain zones. But that's all giving you the opportunity to do this in a tiered effect that allows us not to have to just evacuate the entire community on a day that probably wouldn't need to be evacuated. And so this is a decision guidance tool for your incident commanders. So one of the things I guess I didn't explain well at the last meeting was, what does this mean for your community? Well, what it means is that based upon the evacuation routes that Jaime will speak to a little bit more that we've looked at, that if we have that diligence, if you've protected your home, you've got your go bag ready, you've been already anticipating potentially evacuating, everyone should make it out of the community before the fire impacts them. Okay? So that's the good news. And I don't think I clarified that well enough last time. With that said, why can we really, 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 really emphasize the preparedness part? Because this extreme day, you know is going to happen at least 72 hours in advance. Santa Ana winds don't just come up overnight. Your weather service is watching this and knows that they're happening. And so what the key is as we start to have red flag warnings, so you'll have red flag warnings maybe in Escondido and to the east, but we'll not have red flag warnings down here because you're in a completely different temperate zone. But what does your fire department do? They're monitoring that. They know there's an impact, and then that's where the zones come in and the ability to communicate out, hey everyone, there's red flag incidents potentially in the Escondido area, which could impact you, so start to think about your preparedness. I don't want to go to questions yet, but everybody following where I'm going with that? All right. Onshore wind scenarios. Onshore wind scenarios, because of where you're at in this temperate zone, the inputs are, we decided to take our fine dead fuel moisture as low as we could, 3%, and then change the winds. The outcomes are all the same. If you have a fire that happens in Val Sereno, did I say that right? Val Sereno? In the preserve, and it's an onshore wind event, you're going to have impact on your structures within an hour. Okay? What does that mean? Well, the good news is onshore wind events are typically short-lived. So you don't very often have onshore wind events that go on for days and days and you call teams to. Your fire department can access most of those areas very, very quickly. So that's good for fire suppression. The challenge is that your evacuation routes are difficult going out that way. So if that happens, your battalion chief's immediately going to have to determine who and how can I start to evacuate those areas. So we very clearly wrote it in the report and in the plan that any evacuations that are determined based upon an onshore wind event will be specific to that incident, where it starts, and the impacts that the incident commanders see immediately in that process. All right, so when do we start to look at evacuation routes? What does that mean to us? So I want to, Amy, right? Some of the comments that Amy had made to me made me think, you know what, I'm not explaining some things well. And my wife tells me that quite a bit. So I'm used to it. So when I look at these trees out here, you've all done a very good job with the exception of 2 trees that have cleared up the limbs nice and high, and I can be very confident that I could put a fire engine in here with a very challenging wind event happening, and they would be able to survive in this engine area because of what you've done with the ladder, what we call the ladder fuels on these trees. And so hopefully you're doing the same thing around your homes, clearing out the ladder fuels and getting the trees cleared up. If we had a fire that burned through here, these trees are going to be stable. I don't have to worry about them falling down. Okay? And so as we start to look at evacuation routes, now first of all, none of your evacuation routes here are perfect. We all get that, right? The good news is they're a lot better than most communities that I've evacuated. And you have a lot more options than most communities I've evacuated. So as an example, on the Thomas Fire, Ojai was the branch I was assigned to. And when I first got there, I got in the helicopter, flew around, looked at the fire behavior, got down on the ground, drove it, and all night I just had a stomach ache. So all night, the 2 hours I slept. Went into the ICP in the morning and told the incident commander, we need to tell the sheriff to evacuate Ojai. What? Well, what had happened is the inversion laid over, what we call inversion, so that, the fire activity was very low. But what I knew is that we didn't have control on the fire. And the sheriff was like, well, no, we're not going to evacuate Ojai. So I told him, get a plan. So that whole drawing the maps and doing all that, get a plan to evacuate Ojai. So that night, at 4 o'clock, that inversion lifted, and the fire had been burning all around the community under that inversion layer. And we had fire racing towards structures at 4 o'clock that evening. So I called the IC on the radio and said, we will evacuate Ojai tonight, one road at a time. So I would literally drive up a road, put the engines there, evacuate. And fortunately, we were ahead of it enough. I had resources to stage. He said, I ask you to do 2 things. Don't evacuate the high school, because that's where the evacuation center is. And don't evacuate the hospital, because we don't know where we'll put all the people. Well, we had to evacuate several care facilities, and those people went to the hospital because that was the safest location. Then we were over the numbers at the hospital, and we had to actually put people into ambulances. So when I ordered a dozen ambulances, code 3, to the hospital, I got an immediate call from the IC, what are you doing? I said, we got to get our numbers back down to the thresholds the state requires. So where I'm going with that whole story is that process of knowing where those evacuation routes are, how much time it's going to take us to get to them, where we're going to put people in the meantime, was something I had evaluated all day. So when it happened, we knew exactly how to respond. And the good news is, I don't know if it's good news, but we have ended up creating a donut, we called it, hole, where Ojai was, because we burned around the entire community over the next 3 nights. But no one was injured, and everyone was evacuated safely. So what do I look at? Well, number 1 is reflex time. And so what my concern is, I do not like to evacuate or ask for evacuations at night. Sometimes you can't avoid that, right? But if we can evacuate during the daytime, everybody understands how much better that is. The other thing is our available routes and how fast we can get people to them. This is another thing I don't think I explained well. If our plan is put into place immediately, as soon as a fire is reported, you're already ready to go because you've been listening to the weather reports, you know what the challenges are, then we will be able to evacuate in a condition that's like this, not with fire on both sides of you. None of us want to do that, and this plan is not based upon you evacuating a community with fire burning down the road with you, okay? I just want to make sure that everybody's clear with that. Now, I'm not going to tell you that can't happen because I can't foresee the future. But if all of these things are put in place the way they should be, or what I'd like to see them be, then you're evacuating in a very smoke-free environment that is safe for you to evacuate. So we're looking at available routes and then survivability on those routes. So I'm going to go back just because I know it's going to be one of the topics of concern. And why did we recommend Manchester as one of the ways out? You all know it's not the best road out of here, right? So why did I say that? Well, because what I'm trained to do and what I do is look at what are the fail-safes that I don't need to rely on other people to necessarily bring something to the table to make this plan work, all right? So let me explain to you why Manchester wasn't in your previous plans. And that's one of the things as we started to look at the community, worked with Jaime as a traffic engineer, looked at, is this a viable option? And I'm going to tell you why I believe it is. It's my opinion. You don't have to agree with me. It's okay. This is why. So the challenge is as people come out of these communities, Lone Jack and all the other roadways, and start to turn onto this road, if there's an impediment with people trying to turn and go a certain direction, or, as we were asked to look at, other communities, a regional evacuation, that starts to impact all your other roadways, and the battalion chief is, the IC, is talking to the sheriff and knows that you have impediments to those roadways, how can I have a relief valve that is easy to release that traffic and be able to, what we call, and Jaime will speak to this more, queue up vehicles, but know that they are relatively safe. I'm going to say relatively because there's always, none of these are perfect options. And this is why. Once you get down past Encinitas Boulevard, a lot of things change in my subjective opinion. Number one is your fire environment completely changes down there due to a change in your coastal influence, right? So you see the vegetation changes, the color of the vegetation changes. And most of the roadway, not all of it, but most of the roadway is a place where I know, having driven on lots of roads that are on fire as I'm driving on them, are survivable. You won't like it. It'll be hot. It might, in my case, it might melt a light or two. Didn't like that. Got in trouble maybe, but I know I could survive. I'm not going to die there. Also, worst case scenario, let's say you get to I-5 on one of these other routes, and the I-5, because of a regional evacuation, is completely blocked up and stopped, like it was when we evacuated 190,000 people. Then where do you go? You don't go anywhere if you're on one of those roads. You stop until you can get on. With Manchester, you can go get out of your car and walk to the ocean if you have to. Go to the college, you're safe there. And along the way, there are many, many what we call TRAs, or temporary refuge areas, that we know we could put a fire engine with you in those areas and protect you, because we've done it many, many times before. And so that's what I'm looking at, is there temporary refuge areas in that area? The other thing is this. When I start to look at where can I make an offensive attack on a fire, I look for urban areas. So if you've watched the videos of different fires, Where can firefighters make the greatest impact? I'll use Santa Rosa as an example. Those fires came right into the community. But where did they stop? On the edges of the community. Why? Because those buildings, like your buildings down here, are protected with sprinkler systems. They have fire hydrant systems, and they have large, large open spaces of parking lot, which is where we bring the fire down, what we call down to the ground, and that's where we can fight it. And so most of your fire resources could make a very effective fire attack right there at Encinitas Boulevard along that area. Now, I'm not here that day. I'm telling you what I know from my experience, and that is typical. And this drawing shows you that that is where we have stopped fires. Now, why is this different than Topanga Canyon or Malibu, where you see the fire burn right to the ocean? Well, the topography is completely different. Those hills go right down to the ocean, and they're covered with brush, or were, all the way to the ocean. So you have a completely different topography here. It lays down, and you have an open space on both sides where you have wet drainages that I know people would be safe if they were stalled there and could not get onto the highway. Okay? All right, so that's what we're looking at as we start to make our recommendation. And Jaime will talk about how he did his magic.
Thanks, Shane. This is our third community meeting, and each time I've had to follow Shane, I always feel like the band that has to follow Queen or Metallica or U2. So it's my luck I got the Bono of firefighters right in front of me here. So my company, Traffic Patterns, we do a lot of traffic modeling and analysis for cities up and down California. And when we were looking at, or asked to join the team to help look at what it would take to evacuate Olivenhain, there's a few things that are very different in traffic modeling for fire evacuation versus traditional traffic modeling that you may have seen done around your community for, say, a change in land use or a specific change in traffic patterns. When we're looking at fire evacuation studies in traffic, our main concern is queuing. What is the impact of everyone trying to leave at once and everyone blocking roads and blocking driveways for people to exit out of their homes? And that's what our concern is in traffic modeling for fire evacuation. In addition to that, then, how much time does it take for those queues to clear out? There's a lot of factors that we had to take into consideration as we were working with Shane and his team to figure out, well, what routes can we recommend? And I do want to make a point to stress that when we are looking at our model here, we can only document one scenario within the report. And that is not to say that that's the evacuation that will be followed in the event of a fire. There'll be a lot of factors that will be taken into consideration if that, God forbid, ever were to happen. But we documented in this report the worst case scenario that we felt, okay, as much as you would naturally think you want to turn right and head out towards the north, if that option is not available to you because the more urban densed up area over the hill is also trying to evacuate, you're stuck in the queues behind them. So we said, okay, what happens if we push people south towards the Manchester route? And a lot of things we all liked about that route were specifically, again, the queuing capability and the ability to be able to get people out. But one of the things that's really important is that there's less impediments that are outside of the police control and Shane, or fire control, and that's what Shane mentioned earlier. There's a lot more traffic signals heading out towards the north. When you get onto Rancho Santa Fe, when you get onto Olivenhain Boulevard, those are all things that impact the ability for queues to dissipate. That's, if you're heading to the south, you do have some stop-controlled intersections through the Olivenhain community with El Camino del Norte, 7th, 8th, and 9th, if I remember correctly. But you really only have to pass the one traffic signal at Encinitas Boulevard, and that is a huge element in being able to move queues once you get past these individual controls. So when we put together our analysis, our analysis was focused. Chief Stein mentioned that we focused in just within the Olivenhain border. We understand there were concerns that there's the potential for more people to be coming from the east of you, and we didn't ignore that, but I was really glad to hear, I talked to Chief Stein this morning to know that you guys are looking at a more regional update to the model to try and capture that additional traffic flow that may be coming from the area that we tried to estimate but didn't measure as part of our analysis. So that is one thing that I think can be updated. But what we did as part of our preparation for your model was we came out. Shane's team also helped us come out. We actually just traveled throughout the different times of the day, your community, to try and understand what does it take just in general to move through the community. What's the travel time on a normal busy weekend or weekday time of the day to get all these different routes? How long would it take you just to move through the community? That's what we did in our initial analysis. And then to try and figure out what it would take to evacuate, we made a lot of assumptions that would impact the length of those queues and the length of times that it would take for those queues to move through. A couple of things that we did was we assumed every household within Olivenhain was going to take at least a vehicle and a half. Some people may just jump into one car and leave, but within Olivenhain, we understand there's a lot of livestock. There's a lot of longer vehicles and trailers. That's where the 1.5 number tries to kind of come in. It tries to capture 1.5 vehicle per household, larger vehicles, additional vehicles that may already be on the road coming from the east as well. And then what we did is we made a really high assumption on what we called a friction factor. So that was trying to double the length of time it would take to move through an intersection or down a corridor, and also double the number of vehicles or triple the number of vehicles that are coming down a corridor. Our friction factor for the Olivenhain study was 1.3. So we added an additional 30% of delay and time estimates through all of our analysis. The other thing we did on our recommendations to Olivenhain were to help you figure out recommendations to help advise your firefighters in the event of an incident. That's something that was really important to us as we were looking at this, because you're in an isolated area. I was very happy to find out just recently that Encinitas is going through a very substantial infrastructure update on its traffic signal system. They're putting in a whole bunch of fiber optic networks across the city this fiscal year, which started in July, and they're upgrading all of the traffic signal infrastructure systems that'll give the city and the fire department the ability to do things remotely in the event of fire that don't exist today. So over the next year, you're going to have that. That'll be a really critical tool to help the firefighters fight and it guides you out of your community. That infrastructure won't extend into Olivenhain, but we also made a lot of recommendations to provide traffic surveillance cameras that can be used by fire to actually guide people through the community. And so when we were looking at the fire evacuation, we focused in breaking up the community into 4 pieces. And we did that very manually. We actually jumped onto Google Satellite. We actually counted households. We worked with Shane and his team to use available GIS information to figure out where are the households. Are we confirming that we got the right number of households, adding the number of vehicles to that. And then we also learned where there were extra evacuation points up to the north, I'm going to call it the northeast part of the community, and we broke your community up really up into about 5 pieces and said, let's take all the traffic, push them out this way, and our analysis, assuming everybody's leaving at once. But in a true incident, you're likely you're going to get evacuated in segments, and that's something that Shane will talk a little bit more about, also including some of the tools that you'll be receiving in your community to notify you in pieces to evacuate. If you ever feel unsafe, you should evacuate when you feel unsafe, but that controlled evacuation will be critical in making sure the whole community can evacuate safely. So we looked at your community and broke it up into 4 colored routes. The purple is that northwest section, and then we distributed traffic initially more towards the north, but we figured, hey, for advising fire, let's push everybody to the south to see what those numbers look like. And when we got down here, it took about 4 hours to evacuate traffic out through the Manchester area versus where it took about a little over 3 hours, assuming just that community to the north of you, it's going to take them 3 hours. It's going to take you guys about 4 hours to evacuate just to the south, not impacting them in that specific type of scenario. We also pushed traffic that was coming in from the east through El Camino del Norte, if I remember correctly. So they're coming in and they're merging with your traffic, trying to exit to the south. So that Manchester unimpeded route with less controls lets traffic move freely through that corridor. We also look at what happens if you have to turn right onto Encinitas Boulevard where you have all those additional traffic signals. It took us almost a little over 20 minutes just to get from here out to El Camino via that route. Not very attractive, but again, because of the intersection controls that are there. So this is where we were on the final analysis. So there's a little bit more detail. Again, the purple area, which evacuates through the gate that I think is controlled and opened up in a need. just a couple of hours to evacuate that whole northwestern section of your city. If we're bringing in traffic in from El Camino del Norte and pushing people out towards Manchester, it takes about 4 hours. So these were estimates, but when we looked at historical studies that were done, we were slightly over the historical estimates, so we felt very comfortable that our numbers were fairly spot on. I think that if you do ever go through that regional evacuation modeling process, that would be really interesting for me to see, because we didn't account for exact numbers, but again, we estimated the 1.3 friction factor, the 1.5 vehicles per household. Those numbers try to account for some estimates coming from the east, but a larger regional analysis is going to be very important. Our specific recommendations that are now under implementation include your upgrades to the traffic signal system, at least on the Encinitas side. I apologize, I can't remember the name of the city to the north of you. Carlsbad. Their signals, my understanding, they're a very tech-heavy city. I know Carlsbad specifically has a lot of traffic signal infrastructure technology already. And so they may already be ready to support you, but your city in Encinitas is making these upgrades now. We also made recommendations to your city engineering team to consider taking what I'm going to call Rancho Santa Fe approach at Encinitas Boulevard. Today it's a left, through, right lane configuration. We did recommend that they put in the dynamic signs that would let it go left, through, right. And that is a very simple, quick change to make that'll almost double the capacity of people to be able to move through the corridor if you do need to go right, if Manchester becomes impacted. So we passed along those infrastructure recommendations to your traffic engineers. I know they're considering that specific change, and we're looking at how we can put in traffic surveillance cameras to advise fire in their incident command centers as where officers potentially would need to be deployed to move traffic through and guide people in the right direction. So those were our recommendations focused. But I think this is a worst case scenario. I do want to make sure that is something that is very clear, that if this yellow route needs to get split more towards the north, that's going to be okay. But I think what's going to advise that is what's happening on the ground, and that's going to be a choice that's made by your firefighters. So with that, that's what I have, and I'm going to turn it back over to Bono here.
Don't ask me to sing, I'll just tell you that. So I'm not going to go through all of these line by line due to time, but the few things that we did make recommendation on are in the report. Number one is creating a whole community approach to becoming ready for a wildfire event, and as a community already having plans in place for your animals, as an example. And so that we aren't evacuating horse trailers at the same time we're evacuating people. Those two things do not go well together. You don't want to hear that, I know, but they don't. So that's a recommendation. In all good conscience, I have to tell you, you need to have the animals moved before the event impacts you, okay? And then the other thing is to look at what kinds of improvements can be made in the future to make it better. And so one of the questions that came up last time is, and one of the recommendations we made specifically was to any improvements made on Rancho Santa Fe, that those are considering the impacts those will have on your evacuation routes. And that goes back to my comment about conflicting needs and wants. I'm not saying right is wrong, right, and wrong is wrong. I'm just telling you those things need to be considered as you're making those changes. So then, this is the big thing that I think that hopefully the entire county is going to start adopting in an even bigger way. It's something that, like I showed you, we do immediately when we go to large-scale incidents. Your community, Olivenhain, has already started that process, and it's in place. This can also be moved into a technology-driven process that can give you communications immediately, updates immediately. You can look at, let's say you've been evacuated, is my area being repopulated? All those things can be shared with you through technology. And I know your department's working on that right now to see what those options are and what can be brought to you. But this is the point. The zones that you are in, you will want to Know your zone. And that'll become a new mantra for you. Know your zone. So that you're constantly aware of my zone is under an evacuation warning or not. My zone is being evacuated. So the idea here is that with a lot of pre-planning and being proactive, which your department already is, but proactive on addressing incidents that emerge, that immediately the community is being communicated what those threats are, how they can respond, and whether or not they're an evacuation warning or order. And so hopefully if that happens soon enough, we would be able to say as an example, based upon those fire models that we provided to the ICP, that they say, you know what, in this case, we want to evacuate immediately zone 1 and 2 and 3. Now that's a lot less than us saying, let's evacuate Encinitas. Everybody see the difference there? The number of people on those roadways is going to change. So immediately we can get people out in those particular zones, and as we have more monitoring from the ICP, we can determine if additional zones need to be evacuated. The other thing it does is as we start to repopulate areas, it gets us people back into their homes much more quickly. If we don't have zones like this and we've evacuated, just say, Olivenhain's border, then it becomes very difficult to say, you can go home, but you can't go home. And people don't really understand that. It's hard for us to communicate it during an incident. If we've done this ahead of time, you know that we've cleared your zone. Let's say all of these zones were evacuated. Zone 5, clear to go home. You know, you look at the online forward-facing feature, it says you can repopulate and you go home. And everyone knows exactly where that is, and it's a nice systematic process. And so the benefits of zone-phased evacuations are proven. They reduce evacuation clearance time. They provide an enhanced community notification template, know your zone. Increased community awareness. So on an ongoing basis, the department can do drills, as an example. Say zone 1 on Saturday is going to be your drill day. And they open double L gates, and everybody goes and practices their route. It's a foundation for real-time evacuation modeling, and there's lots of different options out there, but what that real-time evacuation modeling is right now, it's dividing communities up into these predetermined zones. It's immediate communication with those zones about what is happening in your area, and this is still future. It hasn't been perfected yet, but in the future, hopefully very soon, it'll be connected to something like Waze. All right, so they're working on it diligently. I know a whole team of engineers are working on this. I've actually been on calls with representatives from Google on some of these concepts, trying to figure out how can we put these things together. As you can imagine, there's a lot of complications to that, but they're trying to work through that so that with real time, you'd be able to see what your best evacuation route is, which is much better than what I can provide you in a discussion like this. So that is kind of where we're at. They've already started to do the process. It's in the back, and I think that opens us up. Chief Stein?
Great. Great. Thank you, Shane and Jaime. I appreciate that. So we're in the virtual world as well. We have people that are online here listening to us. So I'm going to open up to you, and we're going to hear from your thoughts. Like what I like to do though is they can only hear you and hear the question if you have a microphone. So please. Well, you step here. I'll go around with my microphone, and we'll go around. In the last meeting, I went around several times. So we won't leave until we answer everybody's question here. We're also going to look online to see if they have questions for the people that are attending out there. So I saw your hand up first, ma'am.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you for that very thorough expose. You know better than anyone else that fires don't follow tight municipal borders. So I assume when you draw your zone 3 and your zone 4 and so on, that's coordinated with the zone 2 and 3 and 4 in Rancho Santa Fe, so that we, since we share significant amount of infrastructure, I imagine that thinking has happened, right?
Chief will take that.
Yeah, I can answer that. Yes, absolutely. In fact, all our mapping is done on a regional basis. We use the same map numbers, same grid system, countywide. It's all standard and unilateral. So that has happened. That's correct. Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, so we are coordinated, and we do work with the county that has all the mapping, and we do everything. If we're talking about one neighborhood in Rancho Santa Fe or a neighborhood here, it's all done on a grid system that we communicate together, and we're on the same page.
So our evacuation, just so that we are on record, our evacuation, the models and that what we've listened to today has been coordinated with Rancho Santa Fe, synchronized. Our evacuation plans have been aligned with theirs.
So when they put together ours, they did review Rancho Santa Fe's. The county has an evacuation plan that's all coordinated. A specific community in Rancho Santa Fe may have their own, and we would work with the fire commanders in Rancho Santa Fe. But do my commanders know the exact plan that Rancho Santa Fe has for their community? Probably not. But that's why we would want to have a representative from their community in the ICP to make these decisions for that community.
Because our plan is only as good as our neighbor's plan.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so it's coordinated as much as I think it's coordinated on not just a different fire department. It's coordinated on a regional level. So there is a county-wide evacuation annex that we all follow. And when we're calling for coordination and the sheriffs are doing it, we're speaking the same language. But we would obviously look at their plans as well, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, the scope of this plan, we had to stop somewhere. I mean, we could include Rancho Santa Fe, but then it would be, well, why do you stop at Rancho Santa Fe? We have Escondido. We need to bring in. So we do coordinate, and unfortunately, we're pretty good at coordinating because we've had fires in this region. No, I'm not, ma'am. You're right. So, well, I think your question was the zones that you have in Rancho Santa Fe, how do they mesh with ours? And the answer is we're all on the same grid system, mapping system, and we are going to work collaboratively to evacuate all of our communities. That's the answer. Okay, thank you.
So, Mike, if you want to be an answerer, I can take the question.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
I'll just speak to that. Because of the grid system the county has, we made these recommendations based upon their grid system, so they would still evacuate the entire grid throughout the county. The other thing I think that's important that you understand is an ICP. I showed you what that looked like in the first slide. That's what happens at your ICP for those very reasons. And again, that's why I said in the beginning, plans are worthless. But you must plan. And that's why at the ICP, those plans are used as part of the considerations. But ultimately, those incident commanders, based upon the circumstances that they are given at the time, must make a decision on where and how people are evacuated. Okay?
Okay. So you were talking about conflicting needs and wants. We are a horse community. We have a lot of narrow lanes. You said repeatedly, adding horses to the mix just makes things miserable. Or actually, you've said it stops the process in its tracks.
It could.
It could. So this is kind of more of a community thing, and this really is addressed to you, Chief Stein. When we were talking about adverse impacts to public safety, that was our only hope to remove or reduce the Goodson project. And you told the city that we are safe. That had resounding effects, because then the Attorney General said, your fire chief said you are safe, therefore this project must be approved. Since you and the city have effectively now made our community less safe by adding easily 500 to 600 more cars at a critical intersection, and that's in addition to all of the ADUs, which you have said also, that were not accounted for. So there is a general problem with how the fire departments and people who are trying to protect us, I know it's a whole political issue, but if you are saying something is safe, what are you doing in return for the community? Because so far, this has benefited the developer, but now the community is in a situation where we are absolutely less safe than we were before. I know you've talked about technology, and Jaime, you've talked about technology and the fact that Olivenhain does not have anything that would address those issues. What kind of technology will be added to mitigate some of these threats? At present, developers typically are required to mitigate when they're causing some threats, but because of by right issues, and again, this is a statewide thing right now, something we all have to address somehow. But if cities are putting us in a predicament where now we are less safe, what is being done to actually not just say, oh, we're adding fiber optics to help increase the movement of traffic, but there's cameras, there's thermal stuff, there's a lot of other technology that needs to come now. I mean, it's a shame that it happened. And adding more ADUs and more high-density apartments and approving those without actually addressing the situation it's detrimental to this community.
You want to say anything about that, Mike?
Well, so the plan, you're right, the plan did not incorporate a particular project at all. But the good thing, the starting point, like they said, is that we have a plan. And we have something that we can fall back on and use. I think in this community, we have in the last decade, and since I've been chief, we've done a lot. We put a fire station right here. Then we got it full time. Then we got a better fire engine. Then we got the Double L Ranch where before I got here, somebody from the city would have to manually go to the gate and unlock them both. So that's, now I can do it with the click of my phone wherever I'm at, or anybody can that has that. So there have been improvements. Is it the best? I know. I understand that. I'm in a high fire risk area myself, and I understand. So if I show lack of empathy, I don't mean to, because like I said before, I've had to evacuate myself. It's very chaotic. It's stressful. I don't want to do it again. When I went to the Poinsettia fire, seeing those folks in the very beginning, seeing those folks in that area leaving with terror on their face, I don't want to do that, and I don't want this community to do it. So it's a continuous effort and continuous improvement, and when we see new technologies that we can use, we need to jump on them, and we need to make it better. Yeah, and you because you've had communications between these meetings with the city engineer, so you do have some suggestions.
And just for the
thank you.
folks
So-
online, the question was, what specific technology opportunities are there?
Sure, and I'm going to focus specifically on the traffic side. There's a whole separate set of technology development in the private sector regarding advanced fire monitoring that I'm familiar with, but I'm not an expert on. So that might be something that you might want to look at in a longer term and plan updates. But on the traffic side, the thing that's the most specific is being able to remotely adjust traffic signal timing. Right now, your city doesn't have that capability. Typically, when you're doing it, you need some type of a of a hardwire or cellular-based connectivity to a traffic signal to be able to log in and remotely adjust the timing. Encinitas is in the process of implementing that now. They did receive a grant. They're putting in the fiber optic network around the city. They're replacing the traffic signal controller infrastructure at each intersection that'll let them log in and remotely make those changes. That's critical because when you do have an incident command post in effect, that you can bring in that engineering staff to make those changes for you. That's very specific towards technology. The other piece is just being able to remotely monitor. I know that one of the things that's recently entered into our industry has been infrared specific cameras at traffic signals that are they're more for detection that can provide other uses, but just traffic surveillance in general will help advise the ICP, it'll advise the Traffic Operations Center that may be remote from the traffic group. We specifically were concerned about you need the ability to be able to monitor what's happening on Rancho Santa Fe within Olivenhain. And that's going to be a combination of likely solar-powered base cameras that reside at intersections or key points along El Camino del Norte that are connecting perhaps with Rancho Santa Fe. And that might be something that needs to happen at a more regional coordinated level. But we've provided recommendations for technologies that can support that type of infrastructure. So those are some things that we've recommended specifically. Question in the back?
We're going to work our way around everybody.
So my question is, are you using both sides of the road or one side of the road? It seems to me that your evacuation is a short time frame event, 2 to 4 hours. So it seems there should be no problem getting some sheriffs up there and saying, okay, drive on both sides of the road down Lone Jack, drive on both sides of the road down Manchester and Rancho Santa Fe, and get the hell out of here over the next 4 hours. Then we'll go back to normal. And I don't hear that. I hear we're going to remotely adjust the traffic signals. Sure to God, there's a sheriff's deputy at the traffic signal. I would hope there's a sheriff's deputy at Lone Jack and we're not relying on stop signs. I mean, you know, during an evacuation. So where's the manual aspect of this plan? Because, you know, you don't need expensive technology for an event that is a 4-hour event every 10 years.
No, yeah, I agree with you. And what you said is in the plan. We have it. So we have traffic control points, and we have all the intersections in the plan prioritized of when the first sheriff deputy gets on scene, he goes to this intersection because that's the traffic control point that he needs to be at. The second deputy will go to this intersection to control that one. And so that is all identified in the plan. And then your first question about using both sides of the road, the answer is it depends. It depends. We have to remain flexible. If there's a fire that's impinging here, we want to get residents out. We also want to get fire engines in. So there's a lot of different factors that's going to go into which way we're going to do. What you're talking about, that is a tactic of evacuation. It's called contraflow. Contraflow is when you use both sides of the road to get everybody out. That's used a lot. It's used commonly on the East Coast when they know they're having a hurricane and they know when it's going to hit. And they use contraflow to move everybody out, and it's very effective over there. A wildfire scenario, although it's a tactic, it's not used a lot because people have to come in as well as get out. Hurricane is much different. Everybody's leaving. A fire, people are going out, firefighters are coming in. So it's a tactic, and the answer is it depends. And I'm sorry I can't be more specific. Shane, you have?
I think I completely understand where you're coming from. I just do need to maybe explain the process of evacuation a little more so you understand. All of these technologies, like the chief said, they're great, but you live and die by technology in our business, right? We just don't trust technology all the time. So what does that mean? It means we send an officer to every house to ensure that everyone in that house has been advised that they evacuate, or if they're unable to evacuate themselves, that officer can arrange for an emergency evacuation. Sadly, in some of the incidents we've been in, that meant that they put them in their police car and they evacuate them out in front of the fire front. So that's why a lot of times we looked at the roadways, we can't use contraflow because we will shut down the ability for the officers to get in there and make those rescues. So it's as the chief said, it's something we would consider, but that's where the ICs or the ICP will talk to the sheriff and say, what are our options? Now, maybe that means getting some officers in, and then we can turn the roads around. Those are all things they can do on the fly.
Hi there. We lost the screen. Can you bring up the screen again? So the Goodson project, where is that on this map? It's in zone 4. And it runs, zone 4 runs all the way to Encinitas Boulevard. Is that correct? So Goodson's on.
Here's Encinitas Boulevard. Right
Okay,
here.
so there we go. So it is in zone 4, just the borderline of zone 4 and zone 5. My question is, since you didn't evaluate the Goodson plan from your experience, where are they going to evacuate? Are they going to also go Manchester through there's 500 vehicles coming out of that project onto Rancho Santa Fe? Is
No.
that the plan?
No, there's, for that proposed project, there is no entrance or exit. Only emergency vehicles is on Rancho Santa Fe. Their evacuation route, Hans, correct me if I'm wrong, 300 feet, that'd be west of the intersection of Encinitas Boulevard and Rancho Santa Fe.
So that's where they ingress.
Yeah,
Where they
McCain Lane,
ingress.
the ingress and egress is 300 feet west of the intersection. They'll be getting onto Encinitas Boulevard.
So they'll be going east on Encinitas Boulevard.
No,
so
they'll be going west.
west.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you haven't really done any thorough studies of how that's going to impact all of this, but we do know they're in zone 4 and they're going west, and they're not going to be dumped onto Manchester, even though you feel that Manchester is the favored route. Because of why?
During the presentation, they talked about the queuing, and if traffic is not moving very fast, it's more survivable on Manchester because of the open spaces that we have around there. And
Okay, but
the
how
queuing
long
effect.
is it going to take to queue up 500 vehicles in a
Yeah.
7-story parking garage, all trying to go out on a single lane, McCain Lane? How long is that going to take?
So I'm not going to speak to a specific project. I will speak to what I would recommend in an evacuation of this area is that I would not evacuate until some circumstances changed. Anything beyond the frontage roads that only drop off into Rancho Santa Fe here. Encinitas Boulevard going that way is safe. We don't need to evacuate it probably. Now, every circumstance is different, right? But probably don't need to evacuate that until we have another decision point that's reached where we have fire impacting that area. Anything, and you can see that on some of the studies that were done, anything that's going to evacuate from Encinitas Boulevard will go out west on Encinitas Boulevard, not onto Manchester.
It's not shown on this map either, but what our report includes that is available to the fire department in the event of an incident are actually timestamps that show from this point, what's the travel time to, say, the next controlled intersection, and the next controlled intersection after that, and then the distance to the traffic signal. That travel time information is not shown on this map, but it is available in the reports that the police will have as they're determining the appropriate routes to use in an incident. So that is there. It's just not on this map. I apologize for that.
And if you see this green section here, this is a consideration of evacuating Encinitas Boulevard out to El Camino Real, and what that would look like if we went into that zone. Now, we didn't build it out because that wasn't part of Olivenhain, but that would be that section, and it includes the housing that infrastructure that we had to look at that point.
This is just a continuation of what he said, but you are also going to allow parking on Rancho Santa Fe Road. It's my understanding with the Goodson project, which is going to slow down traffic. Are you going to guarantee that, are you going to guarantee that that gate is not going to be opened by anyone but the fire department? Because if in fact it is opened and those cars start coming out, it's going to stop all the traffic coming from north on Rancho Santa Fe Road.
Hans, how is that looked up in the plans with that?
The two driveways off of Rancho Santa Fe Road are fire department access only. So no one from inside that housing development are going to be able to get out onto Rancho Santa Fe. They'll be monitored and controlled by fire. So
And is it Knox box? Are we using a Knox box
yeah,
system?
Opticom and Knox box, which we normally use on all of our gates.
I'm sorry. Hans, the parking on request.
There is no parking allowed by that project on Rancho Santa Fe.
Did you see any parking on when you're? We will take a look at that. We're not aware of that. Sir.
So, Chief Stein, thank you for your service. I am a bit puzzled, though, because you'll recall that Charles Weber, a respected fire expert, wrote a report about Olivenhain evacuation. And he also wrote a second report, just like assessing how the Goodson project is going to basically impact that evacuation. And his result is that it puts people's lives in danger by increasing the evacuation time significantly. It doesn't really matter that it doesn't open directly to Rancho Santa Fe Road, given that basically McCain Lane is a single lane and it's hanging from Encinitas Boulevard. It's only 300 feet from the most important intersection. Basically, it will surely block the most important evacuation route to the south. So basically, when this was discussed at the city council, you, sir, you basically testified that Weber was being alarmist and that, that was the worst case scenario. And we didn't have to basically take into consideration worst case scenario because these things don't happen. But then I read the Fitch report and we are looking at it again. And it was even more alarming than that. One of the things that I recall, it takes a very long time to evacuate Encinitas Boulevard, maybe as long as 7 hours. So you may look at Encinitas Boulevard and think that it's very large, but then it will turn into a parking lot, right? So my question, sir, is that when basically the community here contacted the county, and we heard that actually you are working in tandem with them in great harmony, the county, the supervisor basically told us that she is interested in making sure that not only Encinitas, but Rancho Santa Fe, unincorporated communities, Elfin Forest, Harmony Grove, all of them are safe. So they volunteered to conduct a study of the impact of the Goodson project and whether it endangers the lives of the people living in the entire county in this part. And basically what they told us is that they are calling you and you are not returning the calls of the county supervisor, sir. So I don't know, I left it a few weeks back, but since then, are you committed, sir, to just ask the county to conduct a study of whether basically the Goodson project endangers the lives of the people of Encinitas and surrounding communities?
Oh yeah. Well, first off, let me correct an accuracy. Nobody's contacted me from the county, and I have not had any non-return calls. If somebody calls me, I call them back. So I'm not sure where you got your information on that, sir, but the county has not contacted me regarding an additional study. I did meet. There are some ladies in Rancho Santa Fe who asked for a meeting, and I had a meeting with them last week. And we talked about getting the county supervisor involvement, and I told them, absolutely, I welcome that. I welcome it. I would like to have it. That would be a great idea. And I've also had conversations with the fire chief in Rancho Santa Fe, and I know that he supports it as well. So yeah, to answer your questions, absolutely. Would love to get it done quicker rather than later. And absolutely. But I don't know where you got your information that I haven't returned anybody's phone call back.
So Mike, I'm aware of some of the background on this, and just for everybody's knowledge, John was told by one of the supervisor's staffers that they'd written to you. We've learned subsequently that that wasn't accurate, and I believe you'll be getting a call from Cody Peterson in her office this week coming up. So
Okay.
hopefully we can make this all happen. It
All
sounds
right,
like it's a good plan.
I'm just trying to correct the record. So thanks, Dan.
Hi, I just had a quick question. I'm also a little puzzled. The evacuation times, it was like 4 hours and 47 minutes under extreme, I think that you, sir, were referencing. When you did your report, what data is that based on? You said that you drove around to get a sense of the area and that there was some historical data, but were you taking into account the preschool that's here, the middle school, the other elementary school, the elder care facilities, you know, all the people who work and the different day workers that are coming in and out, because it's significant as it is. And so I was just wondering, I don't believe that it takes into account Rancho Santa Fe, which is also right there. So where are all those people going to go, and how does that impact your traffic report? And I was just wondering also, who is it that you work for, sir? Yes.
So I work for Traffic Patterns. We're the engineering firm that did the traffic analysis. And
But so you were hired by the city of Encinitas?
we were hired by Shane's firm to come in and support them. The prime contract that did the analysis was with a different company, Fitch and Associates. They're the prime company that was responsible for the delivery of the analysis. We provided just the traffic element as a subconsultant.
Uh-huh. And that you guys did your own data recently, or was that based on old stuff, or what?
So let me try and just make sure we backtrack a little bit. So what we did was we did our own travel time studies through Olivenhain, including El Camino del Norte, Rancho Santa Fe, Encinitas Boulevard, Manchester. So we came in to figure out how long does it take to move from an intersection to an intersection through all of the different evacuation routes that would be available. We used that travel time information in combination with household data and vehicle estimates per household to calculate the queue lengths and travel time to move out of Olivenhain through all of those evacuation routes using the travel time information as an estimate as part of that.
Okay.
That was our specific scope. Now, with that said, our focus of this specific analysis focused up to the Olivenhain border. And so we did not bring in any type of historical counts, say from Rancho Santa Fe to the east of you, but we knew that traffic estimate was going to be there. So what we did to account for that was we used the higher 1.5 vehicle per household, and we also used a high friction factor of 1.3. So to all the delays and all the vehicle counts, we added an additional 30% to help account for that. I think one of the things that's important, and something that Chief Sai is already working on, he's working and looking at, can they do a larger regional analysis that tries to capture some of those base traffic counts that just weren't available to us when we did our initial analysis, that we made higher estimates for, but the base numbers weren't there. And so that's something that would be a future analysis as the reports get updated to try and become more refined.
Okay, it just seems like between Rancho Santa Fe and like the elder care and the schools and all of the animals and everything, that 4 hours and 45 minutes seems very small. I just can't believe that that's true.
And the historical reports that you have had, I think, had a lower estimate. Our travel time estimates were about an hour and a half to 2 hours higher than your previous reports. That's why we said we felt our numbers were extremely conservative in the estimates. that we provided. We think they're a little bit more realistic as to what you could expect. But with that said, the more granular you get by bringing in historical data, traffic counts coming in from Rancho Santa Fe or other communities, that definitely, the more you refine the data, the better. But we were extremely conservative and felt that these numbers were reflective estimates, good estimates of what you could expect with your community traveling out through the different routes that are available to you. Sure. Yeah. And again, I think what's going to happen is this is a worst case scenario where you're forced to evacuate to the south. We've heard repeatedly through a lot of the meetings that didn't feel like the natural evacuation route, that if you were going to exit, you'd want to go to the north. And that's okay. You should go to the route that is available to you. I think in the event of a large fire event, and you have an incident command post in operation, there will be traffic staff from the county and the sheriff's department that are deployed to different key points that are going to guide people out. What's going to advise them is the estimates that we provided that said it's going to take you this long to move through this corridor versus this other corridor, as well as what that volume of activity that's exiting to the north is going to be. So in an actual fire event, your evacuation will look completely different than this. It's going to be reflective of what's actually happening on the ground.
So we have at least 5 more folks queued up for questions. So we will answer all the questions, right?
I just had 2 quick little comments. So you had the CERT as one of your affiliated people. Does Encinitas Fire Department still work with the CERT team that was created 7 years ago? Okay, because since COVID struck, we haven't heard anything about meetings or any other kind of follow-up.
Okay, and just to give you an example, we actually used and activated the CERT team during COVID. They assisted us going around in some of our trailer parks and kind of not taking care of, but at least finding out about the elderly population that was alone.
And was that done through emails or?
Yeah, it was done, and Chief Spalding was part of CERT. He was in charge of CERT he no longer is, but that was his area of responsibility. It's done through emails and probably the phone tree that we have. We also utilized CERT during that time when they did the grocery giveaways at the Del Mar Fairgrounds. Our CERT members helped load the trunks of people there.
Okay, so then somehow my information is no longer with you.
Okay.
Because we were activated with the last fire, and we were deployed to the community center to assist the city staff.
If you'd like to, send me an email, and I'll get you who's in contact, who is responsible for the CERT team
Okay, great.
now.
Because there's
we'll
a
just make
couple
sure
of us like that.
we reconnect you.
The other thing is, I don't know if anyone has driven the fire truck from Rancho Santa Fe Road down to the intersection when anything is going on, because it immediately backs up and that fire truck can't get out. So they could have people walk down, they can call the fire station on Encinitas Boulevard to come up this direction. And there was a fatality, there's been more than one fatality there, that fire truck could not get down. So just FYI, because sometimes you don't know that.
Right. Thank you.
Oh, hi, Chief Stein. I live on Double L Ranch Road, where the evacuation. I've met you. I'm Rachel De La Vega on the road committee. So we take that very seriously up there. On the comment was no horse trailers will be going through that evacuation gate. And earlier as a committee, we talked about taking down this utility box that blocks the corner. Even the evacuation route sign blocks traffic coming the other way. Is that something that could be done just to make it a lot better?
Yes, absolutely. That little dog leg left and then right, there's definitely improvements that can be made.
Okay, that would be good if that could be done, hopefully soon. The other one is...
And just real quick for everybody,
yeah,
that's correct. I want to make sure everybody in this room knows that the recommendations from the Fitch consultants is that horse trailers don't use Double L Ranch Road. So
Okay. And the other one is a low-tech solution is getting all the property owners along Lone Jack and even Rancho Santa Fe Road who have these tall, overhanging eucalyptus dead trees. I shudder to think that that will be really bad.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yep.
But can that be implemented?
Yeah,
And who
I mean,
would implement it?
Well, it depends on who's the owners of the tree, right? But we do have authority in the code to make sure that they're limbed up. We don't have the authority on a private property to say you have to cut your tree down. We can't do that. But,
Yeah.
what we can do, we will do.
Okay.
So, and that is basically what you heard about ladder fuels several times today. That's what we do. We limb up the trees, and by code, we can take them up by 6 feet. So that way, when the fire is down below, it won't catch that tree up and move on a tree to tree to tree. But you're right, and we do that, and that's Honda's shop. He's responsible for that, and him and his group are doing a great job. And Hans, the question was about trees. So you got to make sure that that the trees are limbed up by code, so they don't carry fire. Right. Yeah.
I live in Rancho Santa Fe, and when the fire comes, I will not be coming this way. I'll be going out another route. But it is interesting to know the numbers for Rancho Santa Fe that have not been included in your evacuation report, and I understand why you had to stop somewhere. But, and I talked to Chief McQueed, and he said that there are 40 to 45,000 people in the Rancho Santa Fe Fire District. There are 17,600 dwellings, and you're allowing like 1.5 car per dwelling. And that does not include a dwelling or a structure, does not include how many condos or apartments are in that structure. And then also that there are at least, they don't know how to count the horses, but since there's 482 horses in Elfin Forest, there are at least double that or more in the Rancho Santa Fe Fire District. My only comment is it's so important to include these numbers, even if you just used a third or a fourth of the numbers of the residents of Rancho Santa Fe, you'd have 12 to 15,000 people that will want to come Del Norte and La Bajada. And to have the Goodson project there, that just adds to the difficulty for everyone to evacuate. So anyway, I just want to make sure that you look at that as well, because that's so important for everyone's safety. Thank you.
Thank you. Good point. And I think what we talked about, this regional study, will really take into account. Thank you.
Mike, one quick one on the regional study. I'll keep going. But the Del Mar Fairgrounds as the horse refuge currently doesn't open until the mandatory evacuation's been called. Given the importance of getting the horses out early, is it possible to have the county open that up on a red flag day?
Yeah, I could check into that. I don't know the answer to that. But yeah, I can find out.
You get this county thing wide going.
Right, and you know what? And what happens on a race day or a fair day. So those are some things that we're just going to have to handle, right?
I wanted to echo what she said. I believe that the 1.3 friction factor is way too low, doesn't begin to account for all the people from Rancho Santa Fe. And as far as vehicles, I know having evacuated before, people try to pack as much as they can. And I think 1.5 is also too low. I'd like to see by a show of hands of the people here, how many people would plan to pack as much as you can and go in 2 vehicles at the very least? 3. Big dog. So I think 1.5 is way under. Your data needs to be adjusted.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just want to make a quick note. So one of the good things is we actually have a model now. So a lot of these suggestions that you're making, which are great suggestions, thank you for doing them. If going from 1.3 to 2 as a friction factor, or going from 1.5 to 2 or 3 vehicles per household was something that we needed to do, it's a quick cell change in Excel to make the estimates change. So that is a big benefit to the fact that we have an analysis that started. The analysis can definitely be expanded. There's already discussions happening at a county level to do a larger analysis. So from our standpoint, we've given to the city and to the chief that tool. So the more granular you want to refine the data, it's a really quick change. Now, the hard part was what we've already done. Using the GIS data, using what we had to do visually through Google Satellite. When we saw a structure, that's not one household. If that's a condo complex, we were told, hey, there's 5 condos in here, so that's 5 homes times 1.5 vehicles. But all those numbers are really easy to change now. So I definitely hear some of the concerns. Just recognize for us, now that we have a model, they're very, very simple estimates to change now.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And also, Amy, so 1.5, you're right. Now that with the model, we can maybe next iteration go up and go down and really take a look at it, like on the fire side where they had 5 different scenarios for an offshore and onshore wind. So we can do that for traffic. But I do want to say just real quick, the 1.5 is a pretty common assumption. The county uses it, and the people that do this on a full-time basis in Annex Q, which is the annex for the entire evacuation for the county, that's also in their assumption. It's 1.5 vehicle per household. So I know it sounds low, but it's a pretty standard assumption, and that's all it is an assumption. We can move that up. Yeah. No. Yeah.
Okay, before we go back to the people who have follow-up questions, do we have anybody online, Jeff? Okay, and anybody who has not asked a first question? Okay.
Thank you. I have some questions. For example, why haven't you considered opening up some of the other roads? I believe that Morning Sun is going through. It's already...
I'm sorry, ma'am. It's hard with the mass. I think you said, why don't you open up more roads?
Yes.
Okay.
For example, Morning Sun, I thought was for that purpose, that there is a gate there over to the junior high. Santa Leo Development, they have a choice to either go north or south, and we're south. Why haven't we considered designing the roads in a different way? For example, maybe having the turn lanes made into a second lane going one direction. So if you have 2 lanes of driving and then you have a turnout lane, the turnout lane could either feed traffic north or south, or west, I guess it is. So some of those things that I believe need to be considered. The road over from Lone Jack could go directly up over the hill. It was planned that way at one point to connect over to where the fire station was. The community, or actually our first mayor, Marjorie Gaines, had it closed off. It was supposed to feed to Mountain Vista. But just in an emergency, if we could have that connected, it would flow out directly to the west, north, whichever, toward El Camino Real. Those are some things that I think I haven't heard. We seem to be inflexible just putting Rancho Santa Fe Road down to Manchester.
Those are all great points. Unfortunately, they weren't the scope of this, but I understand. I would want more ways in and out of this community that I can. My personal belief. I asked my staff to look at how we can do that. But that was outside of the scope of this. But always looking at how we can make the ingress and egress out of this community better and safer. So thank you for those comments. Well, point taken.
So it was suggested that Manchester Boulevard is an unimpeded evacuation route because there are no intersections along that route. But the problem is Manchester dead ends on El Camino Real at an intersection. And there will be thousands of people trying to exit south on El Camino Real to the freeway. So how are you going to manage the merging? First of all, Manchester will back up very quickly and will not be able to move because of that intersection where it dead ends. So how's that traffic going to be managed at that intersection?
Well, that will be a traffic control point where we'll have sheriffs there. But it's not going to be, getting out is not going to be a cakewalk, no matter which way we use. So we have to make choices, and we made educated choices with the analysis that these folks did to give us more tools in our toolbox to get people out. And I know we talked about Manchester, and it was in the report as, that's the preferred one, but we're going to get you out any way that we can. And that maybe the fire's in the south, and the fire is impinging upon Manchester. Guess what? We're not using Manchester. We'll be using Rancho Santa Fe North to Olivenhain, or we'll be using Double O Ranch. So I'm sorry I can't give you a more specific answer than that. It's going to be really specific on the incident. So we're going to utilize every roadway out that we can, using these people's knowledge and experience in the studies. They came up with the routes that they did. Did you want to talk specifically about Manchester and El Camino Real?
Sure, yeah. No, I think that Chief Stein answered the question correctly here in that in the event of a fire incident, when the ICP is set up, there will be sheriffs deployed at specific intersections. Manchester and El Camino would be extremely critical to me on a traffic engineering perspective, where it's important to have an officer there that is foreseeing and making sure that the traffic isn't stopping and free flowing to the left to get out towards, say, Highway I-5. You'll have a similar scenario at key intersections to the north and along Encinitas Boulevard, but that next level of traffic operations was something that was discussed when we presented this report to the Encinitas City Council, that another thing to consider is a development of what are called traffic control plans that break down a roadway if needed. That kind of builds on the questions I think that you in the orange color shirt asked about contraflow operations. One of the things that we didn't talk about is that it is a very manual process to implement, say, contraflow operations. That's something that's very difficult to do in an active fire event. So while you want to have traffic control plans developed as part of your emergency evacuation route plans, you do also want to minimize how many cones, say an officer needs to walk down a quarter mile with traffic cones to make sure that there is a contraflow lane available. Those things are very difficult to implement in a fire event. They're more difficult to maintain during a fire evacuation event. So while that is a tool, and I know it is something historically within fire operations has not been historically preferred, but what's more important is knowing where sheriff's departments need to be distributed to and what those officers need to be instructed to do to maintain traffic flows. At Manchester and El Camino, the critical thing is keep that southbound left turn truck or flow moving out towards I-5.
Thank you. Chief Stein, I'd first like to thank you for having the wisdom to recognize the value of bringing in outside consultants to help us with this problem. I know it was a challenge, and I appreciate you going to bat for the community on that. With regard to the fire modeling, I know that you use several different locations for both offshore and onshore fires to show, in the worst case scenario, the fire that you have started at the east end of Harmony Grove, 4 hours and 47 minutes. If a fire of that magnitude starts closer to our city limits, same extreme day, logic would teach us that we're not going to have 4 hours and 47 minutes. If a fire starts in Elfin Forest, my calculation is we have about an hour before the fire physically touches the city of Encinitas. I think the city needs to recognize that, Mike, and make sure that all of the residents realize that. Don't count on that 4 hours and 47 minutes. It's probably not going to happen.
Good point, Denny. I agree with you. I mean, fire is closer, it's going to be upon us faster. Absolutely, yeah. Yep.
And I like a lot of the things I've seen up here, Chief Lauderdale. I'm still a skeptic on, as you might imagine, on evacuating by zone because of the human factor involved. Fire and law enforcement can have the best plans put into effect, but if I see smoke and I'm concerned and I can't find good information on where that fire is. What are we taught? What did I teach my family and my neighbors? Is that if you feel threatened, leave. That will put a little bit of a hitch in the get-along of all of our officially evacuated people.
True.
That's something.
No, good point, and that's, I like to underscore that. If you feel threatened, leave. You don't need to wait for the order. And you're right, Denny, that can throw a wrench in it, but it could also be a benefit too by getting people out. On the flip side, getting them out early. You may not even have an evacuation order or even warning, but if you feel threatened and you're out, then you're ahead of the game. And I would encourage everybody. I mean, if you feel threatened, you don't need to wait. You don't need to wait. You can get out. What we're doing with the zones is trying to be as organized as we possibly can for a plan to try and reduce the numbers on the roadways in somewhat of an organized fashion. And you know, I'm hoping that we never have to use it, but we got a plan in case we do. And that's. But your point's well taken.
The
Actually, real quick, if I can,
Sure.
it came up during our second community meeting. So I'm actually going to ask Chief Stein a question, just because I thought it was a great question last time. I believe there is a registration point that people can go to online to register their cell phone number in San Diego County, and that zone system that we're referencing will actually automatically send you information similar to like PG&E, other evacuation parts of the state. What is that site, Chief, where people can go and register their cell number?
Yeah. So there are 2 emergency mass warning systems that we have here in the county. What Jaime is referring to is called Alert San Diego, and you can register your cell phones on readysandiego.gov, and I'll repeat that, readysandiego.gov. And what that does is that hits all the landlines in the area, but a lot of us don't. I don't have a landline anymore. And it also hits the phones that are registered in that particular area, but you have to register your cell phone to get on that one. That's mass notification system number 1. The second system is called Wireless Emergency Alert, WEA. You don't have to register your cell phone for that. That system, if you're in the area, you will automatically get pinged if you're in the subject area. So,
Like a text?
yeah. So if I'm a resident of Olivenhain and I'm in this area and they're calling for evacuation order, and let's just say I have residents or family members from New York, and they're in the area and they have their cell phones, they're going to get pinged as well because they're in the area. So those are the 2 technological mass notification systems we have here in the county. You'll also be warned by, if possible, by helicopter, by knocks on the door, by bullhorns, and by social media sites, 211, that type of stuff as well, news outlets. So those are how we're going to get the emergency notifications out.
The piece I really liked, Chief Lauderdale, was up front when you talked about going forward, the long-term things we can do. One of the things you centered on was aligning city planning with Firewise community tenants. I wish that was in place now, because we could have used that with the Goodson project. Just because that project is not within the higher fire threat or the very high fire threat, it is adjacent, less than a quarter of a mile, in land not managed by Encinitas. And that was totally disregarded. And I realized that your task and your scope of work did not include that. I think that was an error on the city's part, I truly do. But going forward, I wish there was some language that we could insert that would hold the city's toes to those very words in that go-forward plan, is that to take care of things like that, what does it mean to align the city planning with Firewise communities? Any thoughts on that?
Well,
we put it in the recommendation that those things start to be discussed. And you know, Denny, more than most about the processes and all the different implications of those kinds of things, being a fire chief or being in the fire department in that chief officer role. There's a lot of factors to come to bear on anything you want to change, right? So, you know, the thing that I appreciate all the comments, but one of the things that I really haven't heard a lot of comments on is that, to me, the most important part of this report was what we do individually as landowners to prepare our community to protect our neighbor. All right, because the community that I looked at can do a lot to improve its resiliency to fire and lower the threat to your neighbor, to yourself, and to everyone by just implementing some very simple vegetation management practices and things that are easy to implement individually now. And I know that your fire council is going to help with some of those things, like chipping programs as an example, things like that. But again, there's a lot of large scale, and I wish this was the only community challenged with this, right? Yeah, I won't bore you with stories, but that it's, honestly, this community has issues, it has things that needs to be dealt with, but it's not nearly as bad as many communities that I go to on a regular basis. And so you got a lot going for you. And number one thing you have going for you is this momentum you already have to have those discussions like Denny's talking about. How do you do those things? I don't know. I don't know your politics. I don't want to. Those are all things that we need to do. But especially on the West Coast, we have to change the way we see our fire problem and make it an individual responsibility to change the environment that we live on so that it's resilient to fire.
Actually, I read something today that was just right on point with this, which says government was created, this was from a public policy professor, government was created to help us through disasters that can't be solved by one person alone or even by individuals working independently. And I think that a lot of the problems that we're facing in this community cannot be solved by one person, but we need a collective action involved. And you know, something that was discussed in one of the previous fire seminars, and I hope you can touch on this, was the likelihood of a non-survivable event if the fire hits the small roads in Olivenhain. And we discussed this at length in the last session. We're not saying maybe the major evacuation roads, but there's a lot of roads out here in Olivenhain that if you're not able to evacuate and you get stuck there, it was discussed as a, quote, non-survivable event. So I was hoping you could touch on that. And then also, following on what Denny was saying that's related, how can we use the lessons and what's important in this evacuation plan to better plan for the city of Encinitas's fire and safety issues? Because the city as a whole is doing quite a lot of things that are adding additional impediments to our safe evacuation. You've heard a lot about Goodson, but there's bike lanes planned on Lone Jack. There's a lot of traffic calming measures that go in all the time, and that's been described in this plan as endangering our evacuation roads. There's a proposed native plant ordinance that appears to possibly be requiring the planting of, basically certain native species in people's backyards. Our firsthand experience with that, by the way, a government-required landscaping next to us, it's considered high fire risk. We have trouble getting fire insurance because it shows up on this government-required native planting is showing up as being a high fire risk area, putting us at risk. And so I hope that you can address those sort of issues. Non-survivable event on roads, what we can do moving forward, because the city of Encinitas continues to plan in a way that is not keeping us safe. Thank you very much.
Good. Yeah. So I'll let Shane talk about the non-survivability on the road, but since I have the microphone, I'll kind of talk about the impediments. And Shane talked about this really specifically in the very beginning of his presentation, and you're right. There are there's different or forces that don't align when it comes to this. Everybody wants slow speeds, right? And they want road narrowing and all this type of speed humps and bumps to slow the traffic around their neighborhoods. And you see it, especially in the city of Encinitas, you see those humps and bumps going up all over the place. But guess what? I mean, in order to get out of there, it doesn't help, right? So I know people want naturally slow speeds around their neighborhoods, but then in a fire evacuation, it's just counterproductive for us. So that's the balance that we have in the city, is weighing those two and trying to balance them out. Their plan, one of the recommendations is that traffic calming measures should not be initiated here in the Olivenhain area. And I believe that. I mean, we need to make sure that we're able to get people out, and it's counterproductive. So, but those are the things that he kind of talked about. Different people want different things, and unfortunately, some of them are just opposed of each other. But as your fire chief, I really don't want those traffic impediments here in Olivenhain either. So with that, road survivability.
Yeah, absolutely. There are areas on those back roads in particular where the road is so narrow and the vegetation is so thick that if you were stuck in your vehicle there, there is a likelihood that it's not survivable. I'm going to be very frank about that. And so I would do all I could to try to make sure, number one, that's why we address Manchester. And I just want to speak to, again, I know that there's a lot of other factors in people's mind. With the Goodson project, I'm hearing that come up. But I'm not focused on that. And the reason I'm not focused on that is because that's not what I'm focused on. I'm focused on how do you take this community and get the most people to safety the quickest. And that's where Manchester comes in, is if, number one, community has to be proactive. Your department, I know, is going to be proactive. And things that are in the report that are very specific, and I know people did not probably want to see them, about creating TRAs, temporary refuge areas, for your horses. I saw many areas where horses can survive very well, but there's got to be a community agreement that those horses can be there. So when red flags come up, you already have neighbors helping neighbors and have moved your horses to those areas. I don't know how you do that. I can't help you with that. But I can tell you that that kind of thing would say, we have red flags coming up, let's put our horses in a safe area so we don't have to move them when we're moving people. Those proactive steps are how we keep our roadways safe. And trying to do what Jaime looked at is how do you clear those queues the most quickly? And I just want to talk to some of you said, Denny, you're absolutely right. There are so many variables to where the fire starts. And what we looked at is a fire start that would envelop your community. A fire that starts closer to you is going to, on the red flag days, the Santa Ana days, the one thing great about a wind-driven fire, I know exactly where it's going, okay? And so then if it starts closer to me, it's not as wide of a fire front, and so it's going to impact a smaller portion of your community, and we can focus our energy much more quickly there. So we just looked at if the Olivenhain was enveloped with fire, what does that look like? So just wanted to speak to that.
I just had one follow-up response to that as well. Is I haven't personally seen the traffic improvement plans along Rancho Santa Fe. I do understand there's consideration to think of a bike lane project out in that area, but when I talked to the traffic engineer in Encinitas, and that would be a combination project with Carlsbad, we did suggest, as you're implementing these bike lane projects, what's really popular across California are what are called class 4 bikeways. That's where you have a bike lane, you have a buffered space in between it, usually around 3 to 4 feet wide, and then you put some type of vertical element within the buffer space. Usually you see these about 6-inch wide with the tubular delineators, they're called K71 markers. We specifically recommended to the traffic engineer, don't make Rancho Santa Fe a class 4 bikeway. Sure, buffered bike lanes are awesome. And in the event of that being a fire evacuation route in an incident, well, now that bike lane and the buffer space is the equivalent of an extra lane. So you don't need the contraflow bike lane. If you plan the roadway design correctly, that buffered bike lane can also be your parallel new lane for use in an incident. So there's a lot of things you can do, and I think that roadway planning started before this planning event started. So there's some alignment that needs to move forward, but we've passed those recommendations on from a traffic operations perspective for evacuation purposes.
I just want to speak out for the livestock people. We came to Olivenhain 45 years ago because it was a horse-friendly neighborhood. And when I was on the Olivenhain cab, I was asked by the city to do a study on just how many horses were just in this Olivenhain Valley. Over 200. I said, I can't believe there are 200 horses in here. They're tucked into backyards. They're everywhere. We handle 25 to 30 occasionally. Our neighbors handle 60. Okay, we're approaching 100 just next door to me. So we have to, I was very excited to hear that you didn't recommend moving horse trailers and citizens at the same time. That you're going to, it sounded to me as if you're going to plan something, give us a heads up or something to let us know ahead, which would involve working with the fairgrounds, of course, because that's where a lot of the horses are going to go. And if they can't go until there's a red alert, why, we have to coordinate that. But could you just outline just how this would work, that the horse trailers would go first? Each horse trailer in our area carries 2 horses. Some get up to 8. When we have to evacuate, we call on friends and neighbors who have horse trailers to come help us. We can't get all 25 horses out at once, and our neighbors at 60, I don't know how they manage. But anyway, we also have to look at this transporting of horse trailers in waves. A horse trailer has to come in, pick up a horse, take it to the fairgrounds, come back for the second load, pick them up, take them down. And all of that takes time, and we can't possibly do that in the 2 or 4 hours that we're, sounds like we're being given or that we can expect. So could you describe that, how that process would work? Have you seen it work in other places? And how can we work this heads up?
Well, I'll speak to that first. First off, they gave us a very detailed large animal evacuation process that's in the plan. And I do have some, so my horse contact person in this area is Jennifer Bishop. And she's very vocal and really has given me a good perspective of the number of horses that we have. So they have a very detailed plan for large animal evacuations that they've seen in other places that we're going to try to replicate here. But in the short time that we have, they also recommended in the plan, as you stated, that on red flag days, no fire, just it's a very high fire severity day, that horse owners prepare and or also get their horses out of the way. So this is even before any fire or any evacuations. It's incumbent upon the horse owner to get the horses out first. So that's kind of how their recommendation is. I'm hoping, and I know from experience, not everybody has trailers for their horses. I know that. We're going to do the best we can. The county uses the Humane Society, and we've had them in this building doing several classes in terms of the assistance that they will give with their trailers, the Humane Society and the Department of Animal Services of the county. In an event of emergency, they'll bring trailers in, but it's not going to be easy. It's going to be very chaotic. I agree with you. I don't have an easy answer for you other than we'll get them out as quickly as we can. We had to evacuate some, and the fairgrounds was used. The last round of fires we had here, and that was the Cocos fire and the Poinsettia fire a few years back. That's when the last time that the racetrack was opened up for an evacuation site for horses. It's going to be tough, but we're going to need the horse owners' cooperation and really assist you as best we can in getting your horses out. That's the answer I have. I'm sorry I didn't answer it. I wish it was a clean answer, but it's just we're gonna have to work together to get the. Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
So I have a comment question. One is actually just back to the phased evacuations in Encinitas Boulevard. So many of us, when we saw the first plan, Shane, I understand you have the professional wherewithal to sit through a wildfire on a road, but I picture the whole community on Manchester with horses and all of that, and it frightened me to death when I saw that Encinitas Boulevard was closed off. So you were talking about phased evacuations, and Jaime, you were talking about regarding traffic flow and why Encinitas Boulevard would be closed off. Historically, Village Park, New Encinitas, has never been evacuated when we've had these big fires. So why would we even consider closing off Encinitas Boulevard to us and having people route down Manchester when Rancho Santa Fe community and all of us would, in many cases, and sometimes people who have horses that don't behave well and would be a horrible place to put with a fire, being up on a road like Encinitas Boulevard where you have a huge buffer would seem to make more sense. That's just my first comment, and I just hope to God that you guys open that road up and stop scaring a lot of us.
So I do want to reiterate for the audience and people watching at home. So in the event of an actual evacuation scenario, you know, you're going to have every route that's available to you open. What we did when we looked at this fire route heading south towards Manchester, it's off the screen now, but
Yeah.
it takes 7 hours to clear just Encinitas Boulevard from Manchester, Rancho Santa Fe to the east because of the impacts from what is today the inability to properly coordinate all those traffic signals and the queues that build up as a result of that back into this community. So it's not that the Encinitas Boulevard route would be closed off to you. It's just that the evacuation route doesn't favor that route for continuous traffic movement. Now, with that said, I will reiterate, I had that conversation with the city traffic engineer. They're already moving forward with paths to give the city the ability to be able to properly coordinate and evacuate traffic. I gave this story at the previous meeting. You know, one of the stories a lot of people don't know is with the Paradise Fire that happened, it's been, I think, 2-3 years now. When that fire happened, the week before the fire happened, they had just upgraded their traffic signal infrastructure.
Right.
The week before, they had just had training on what it took to stop time the traffic signals so that they could hold a corridor green. And the city engineer who lived in Paradise, as he was evacuating, stopped at every intersection on his way out and implemented those stop time strategies. Had he not had the technology and the knowledge to do that, it would have been a much different scenario in Paradise than what already happened. It was bad enough, right? And so, again, Encinitas Boulevard will not be closed to you, but today, knowing what the challenges were with the proper operation of that floor evacuation, we just didn't recommend it. But we showed in the report, starting from here to get to there, trying to evacuate people if they are leaving on their own, it's 7 hours just to evacuate that scenario. That is not a good mixture with traffic trying to also exit Olivenhain. Now that, again, doesn't include the people that are coming from Rancho Santa Fe as well.
Right.
And so those queue buildups, even though it's a wider roadway, doesn't have the unimpeded flow operation that Manchester does. So again,
I think
it won't be closed off to you.
My only point on that was it historically has not even been evacuated. People aren't even leaving. But that was more of a comment. my question is, Chief Stein, when we had last February, we had that 3 barn fire right in front of my house. So the ranch right down this road. It was 3 solid days of Santa Ana winds, and we had that night not a wisp of wind. And those fires kicked up in the first barn, went to the second barn structure, went to the third barn structure. A lot of us neighbors were there. My husband was there. You guys have most of the footage you have is from our cameras, because we were trying to run down to see if they needed halters, whatever they might need. Luckily, all of their horses were out in a show, except for 2. And all the staff was gone, except for their daughter. My big concern was it took over 30 minutes, closer to 40 minutes. I know you questioned that, but we were right there. You saw when we have footage when the actual water line filled up for the first time. And our biggest concern was, in going forward, I'm hoping with some of these, I'm hoping it's a lesson well learned, that with some of these larger horse ranches, that's over a 10-acre ranch over there, that there's a really clear understanding of where that darn fire hydrant is. Denny told me when we had talked after this, every truck has a GPS locator on it that should be able to tell them right where, that should be just known. So I'm hoping, as a lesson well learned from that particular one, again, no wind. 3 solid days before, and Santa Ana's picked up again the next day. So we were really lucky because there's a lot of tall, older vegetation that just leads straight into the neighborhood. I'm hoping that we can actually do some sort of coordinated effort with the different ranches that are around, that the firemen who are going out there, the fire personnel going out there, have a better understanding of the lay of the land, so that I know Rancho Santa Fe responded to that one, and he was the first one there. There was a lot of confusion, and I'm really hoping that what can happen from that is that there's more awareness of the larger ranches so that they can get water to those, because it took a long time.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one last very small point, and I debated if I should let it go or if I should bring it up. But I heard several of you sort of pit walkability against evacuation times. And I'd like to push back a little against that, because along Rancho Santa Fe Road, so Rancho Santa Fe Road is unwalkable. There are portions that have trails, but there are also portions where one is obliged to go onto the asphalt, and it gets, that the trail gets interrupted. It's very hard for me to understand why continuing that trail, so that it is, rather than being these kind of portions that stop and go, why not continuing that, why continuing that trail from El Camino Real, El Camino del Norte all the way to the Manchester intersection, how that would not help. This is a promise that the city has made to us to continue the trail for a very long time. It has never kept it. And it seems to me that if we were able to actually safely walk at the same time as we were able to drive, that would not stand in the way of evacuating in a wildfire.
Well, first of all, you're exactly right. I'm sorry that I may have given that impression. That's not what I meant. What I meant was simply any improvements that are done on Rancho Santa Fe, as you make those, think about how it's going to impact your evacuation routes. That's all I meant. And specifically, I think what we in some of the other meetings and in some of the traffic documents, Rancho Santa Fe study documents that I read in preparation of this, I saw some concerning possibilities being presented. Again, I'm not commenting on any specific. I was very broad in my statement. That's going to rely on the people that are actually implementing that to consider how can we get the best thing that we can for our community, riding trails or whatever. And I agree. The more width you have, I like 60-foot wide roads. You probably wouldn't want that right here, but I like that. Get as much as you can, but consider how it's going to impact your evacuations in the process. Does that answer your question or concern?
Okay, last call for questions.
Sarah, and then this gentleman here has a question too.
Chief Stein, this is one for you, I think. I have heard rumors through the grapevine that the sheriffs don't really have enough personnel to staff the different intersections or to get them here in time. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so honestly, I manage the fire departments for 3 cities, Encinitas, Long Beach, and Del Mar. All of them contract with the sheriff for law enforcement. We're not like Carlsbad PD that has a very limited number of officers or others that have their own. And I am happy that we have the sheriffs because they have so many people on duty at any one time, given time. They can get people here quickly, and they've done it effectively many times in the past with all the fires. They can get mobile field forces here quickly because they have the staffing already on, and obviously they'll be going through callbacks and everything like we will. But the good thing about having that large agency here is that they are able to move people from around the county and get them here as quick as possibly can, with traffic. So I'm happy we have the sheriff here, because that if I was at a city that had its own police department, then I would have to go through one more step of bureaucracy, because the sheriff is responsible for the entire county when it comes to evacuations. They are the evacuation agency, and even the smaller cities will rely on the sheriffs. That's going to have to go through a request, where we don't have to make that request. It's automatically done. Well, I mean, all fires require intense resources. So yeah, to our best ability. Yeah, right. For the first. Yeah.
Hi. During the Witch Creek fire, the wind blowing typically this way towards the east, I got to watch the fire come over Mount Israel, and luckily they were able to beat it down before it got down into Spooks Canyon. Spooks Canyon is a giant tinderbox. Is there any plans to do mitigation with the vegetation, spooks in the Val Sereno? Because once it gets into Spooks, it's going to just blow up into here.
Yeah, I can't talk about Spooks Canyon. I'm not sure if you can, and we can talk about Val Sereno. County Parks has a majority of that, but my staff is intimately familiar with Val Sereno and the issues around there, and we're working as best we can with the private homeowners as well as the jurisdictions that own that to make sure that they reduce their fuel. Hans, can you elaborate on that at all?
Well, I can't elaborate too much. That's about it. We are working with agencies trying to get some clearing done in that area. Again, it's a preserve. So it's difficult. The county maintains it. They have some pretty strict rules. We're chipping away at their belief that it has to remain as it is. And I think we're making some progress. There's some light at the end of this tunnel. I just can't speak about it right now. Hopefully in the near future we'll be able to remove some of that dead, dying, non-native vegetation. The county parks. Yes. Yep. There is. I don't recall her name though. Do you recall her name? We've walked out there. Jessica Sissel. Jessica Sissel. Thank you.
And I guess if I can answer your question also, just generally, it doesn't. We have canyons all over the place. So in any area that we have, I think I mentioned this in our last meeting, is that these wildfires are influenced by three main things, and that's fuel, weather, and topography. That's what drives these fires, and we can't do very much about the topography, and we can't do very much about the weather. It is what it is. But what can we do collectively as the fire department, as a private homeowner? We can reduce the fuel. So and that's what we are really striving to do no matter where we're at, and if you can do it on your own property, reduce the fuel, that dramatically improves chances of your house surviving and all of us as a community surviving. So just kind of remember that. Out of the three things, that's the only one that we have control over. Yeah.
Foam seemed to be the big thing. Mm-hmm. Was that ineffective? Did it not work?
No, it has shown to work. So we carry foam with us. I know that there's some commercial products that homeowners can buy if they want to spray it, if they have time to spray it on their homes and before they leave. I know you can. Historically you could have bought these products at Home Depot. I'm not sure if that's still available. Do you know? Yeah. Okay. But No, there are companies that do go around and actually spray homes with the foam, and I don't think it hurts. I think it helps.
Our insurance company said that we were eligible to do that, but since then we haven't had to evacuate.
Yeah, well, maybe check with the insurance company. Maybe they can recommend a vendor or something, or maybe they have that you can use.
I have a question and a request for you. The question is, once this meeting is over, if we have other comments, suggestions, or questions, what's the most appropriate way to get them to you, both of you, so that the community hears it, and specifically the community hears your answer?
Well, if you have a question, you can always email me. I'll get back to you. I guess when I send you the answer, I guess you would be the judge if you want that out to be broadcasted out, or is that's a personal question for you. I don't want to take somebody's personal email and then broadcast it all the way out, and I don't know which ones I can do that and which ones I can't. But having meetings like this and classes on large animal evacuations and coming in and having our fire prevention fair that we had through the Fire Safe Council a few weeks back, and just coming to the community and talking to everybody here, that's how these things get out and work and have this two-way dialogue. So, I have a group of firefighters, 24/7, 365. You can talk to them. They'll get it to me. Attend these things, please. We have some educational seminars coming up right here in this building, don't we, Hans?
That's correct. July 30th and August 13th. We've got a defensible space, which I wanted to respond to you, and that's one of the biggest things that those folks that have those ranches with a lot of horses is make sure they have that defensible space around the property. And the chief up there talked about how important that is in survivability of your structures and your animals, if you have animals. So making sure that defensible space is in place around your property. It gives the fire department a leg up in, we can go to those areas. If it's got good defensible space, we may be able to commit some time there to clean it up a little bit, make it a little safer, and then we move on. But if all of Olivenhain took that stance and wanted to create that defensible space, that'll go a long way in preventing the transmission of that fire moving forward. You reduce the fuels, right? If you move the ladder fuels, you get separation between the vegetation and your structures, and reduce that fire load. So, yes.
So there you go. So we'll be back in this building July 30th and then August 15th for more community engagements.
In the bags out there, there are 2 brochures from the California Fire Safety Council, and they're excellent. One is on defensible space, and the other is on home hardening. So you can get probably most of what you need from me, at least to get started. And do come to these workshops.
Thank you, Sarah.
So, Chief, my request is for you and Fitch, and that is once you feel like you've captured enough comments and this is what you want to live with prior to the regional one, figure out what makes this break.
I'm sorry, I missed.
Figure out what makes this plan break. If it's
Makes
not
it-
the
makes it
first
break.
fire.
Makes it break, okay.
What are the pinch points there? If I count at least 10 to 15 intersections where you're going to need a deputy or 2, how reasonable is that if it's not the first fire?
Yeah.
And what's the net effect?
Right, and point taken, absolutely. We have them prioritized in there, so when we do get resources, we know where to put them. That's the good thing about having this plan. But thanks, Danny.
Thank you.
Mike, as you do the rev of this plan, which I assume is happening over the next several weeks, right? Can you look at that critically for the intersection prioritization? Because the plan as it's written doesn't have Manchester and El Camino Real, and doesn't have Rancho Santa Fe and Calle Cerro La Posta as priority intersections, and clearly those are important.
Okay, will do, thanks.
Any other questions? All right, well, I want
All
to
right.
thank the fire department and Fish and Associates. I think bringing the attention to the wildfire evacuation. I know a lot of us are upset about the Goodson project, but independent of that, we can all agree that we need to do some work to keep the community safe. And so thank you guys for the collaborative.
Thank everyone for coming out. Last but not least, thank you, Jeff, very much for doing all this stuff. Can you give Jeff a round of applause?